Chapter 1265. Obviously, Malvina was tempted by the outside world, so there were only two choices in front of Luke. One was to succumb to the other party's scheme and become a member of this small group. Then, he would expose the other party's true colors bit by bit and let the girl understand how dangerous this world was. Finally, he would bring her back safely and fulfill his promise with Brolin. The other was to simply and crudely kill this one-eyed woman and her accomplices. He would use the bloody truth to tell Malvina that the survival of the fittest was the law of the outside world. As long as he didn't agree, no one would dare to accept her, let alone travel to a faraway place. In fact, Luke didn't know why such a dangerous thought popped up in his mind. It was as if there was some kind of cruel and tyrannical emotion hidden in the depths of his soul that had inadvertently emerged. As for whether the girl would hate him for the rest of her life, that wasn't a problem that he needed to consider. Anyway, he didn't intend to maintain the so-called friendship with this little girl. In his eyes, there was nothing more important than figuring out his mysterious background and his strange appearance. As this extremely dangerous thought became clearer, Luke began to unconsciously reveal a strong tendency to attack, especially the astonishing magical energy that was constantly revolving around his body and even formed a light blue barrier. The woman with the eye patch undoubtedly noticed this and immediately asked with vigilance, "Damn it, what are you trying to do?" "What am I trying to do? Of course, I'm going to kill you." It was as if Luke had turned into a completely different person. With lightning speed, he completed one of the most destructive spells he had ever mastered. The next second, boom, a meteor with a diameter of more than 5 meters and burning with high temperature fell from the sky and smashed directly at the place where the one-eyed woman was standing. The shockwave from the impact directly threw Malvina, who was beside her, away. She rolled along the ground for a few meters before stopping. The neighboring houses and streets were destroyed in a destructive manner, and even a few unlucky onlookers were implicated. Some were killed, and some were injured. "Bastard, you actually want to kill me?" The one-eyed woman sensed danger and escaped the direct impact of the meteor a second earlier. She was obviously not as easy to deal with as the guy who came to find trouble with her. Regardless of experience or combat level, she was far superior to the former. "That's right. As long as I kill you, Malvina will have no choice but to follow me back to the tribe's encampment. At the same time, it will serve as a warning to those fellows with ill intentions." Luke didn't try to deny anything and admitted it openly, because at this moment and in his heart, killing was not a taboo at all, and it would not create any psychological pressure or even a sense of guilt. On the contrary, he suddenly felt that the intelligent creatures who called themselves human beings were actually no different from the beasts and monsters in the desert that could be killed at will. The only difference was that the beasts and monsters attacked purely for food and survival. On the other hand, these humans with higher intelligence were doing it to satisfy their ever-expanding ambitions and desires. Death. Only death was the most equal thing in this world, even in the entire universe. No matter how great one's power was, how terrifying their power was, or how shocking their wealth was, they could not escape death in the end. You're crazy. You actually want to kill people for this?" Malvina struggled to get up from the ground, her voice full of fear and trembling. For the first time, the girl realized that this peer who had grown up with her and lived with her for more than 10 years had become so unfamiliar, so cold, and so indifferent to life. "No, you're wrong. I just suddenly thought of something. I was too naive in the past and was bound by the ideals instilled by the elders. But now I've woken up. Come back with me if you don't want everyone in this town to die because of your little willfulness." Following Luke's threatening words, an even larger meteorite that almost covered the entire sky gradually took shape, hovering several hundred meters away in the sky. Anyone who wasn't an idiot could clearly see that if this thing really smashed down, Darazan town would definitely disappear from the map forever. In an instant, panic quickly spread in the town. Whether it was the merchants who came from afar or the bandit groups who ruled this place, they all quickly retreated and took the most valuable things with them. "Lunatic! You're a fucking lunatic who can't be reasoned with." The woman wearing an eye patch raised her head and stared at the meteorite in the sky, her face revealing shock and fear. Never in her wildest dreams would she have thought that her little trick would trigger such a chain reaction, even pushing the entire town to the brink of destruction. However, Luke didn't care about the others and continued to stare at the girl's eyes. "Tell me, Malvina, do you want to come back with me or watch everyone die here? If it's the latter, then I guarantee that this destruction won't be the last. No matter where you go, destruction and death will follow you like a shadow. You will slowly become a disaster in the eyes of the world. Every town and even village will refuse to let you enter their territory. Is this the life you want to pursue?" Malvina was obviously panicking. She looked at the one-eyed woman at a loss and tried to seek help from her. Unfortunately, the one-eyed woman couldn't even protect herself, let alone care about her. Originally, the other party had accepted Malvina in order to trick Luke into joining them. Now that the latter had displayed unparalleled magical power, who would care about the former? In the end, the girl couldn't bear the huge mental pressure and cried out. She cried and shouted, "You win! You win! I'll go back with you." "Very good. That's a good girl." Seeing that his goal had been achieved, Luke withdrew the giant meteorite that had scared away half of the town's population. He held Malvina's hand and walked step by step out of the only entrance. During this process, no one dared to stand out and obstruct them or do anything that might cause a misunderstanding. No one noticed that Luke's footsteps were much slower than usual. He was even a little weak, and his face was paler than before. Without a doubt, this was a sign of magic overdraft. As a 12-year-old child, no matter how high his talent was, it was impossible for him to cast such a powerful destructive spell without paying a corresponding price. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1266. Who am I? Where did I come from? What's with those thoughts and ideals that suddenly emerged? Even though they were already far away from Darazon, the sun had already set, and the entire vast desert had once again entered an environment where a drop of water would turn into ice. However, Luke's mind did not cool down like the ambient temperature, but instead became more active. Sometimes he even had the misconception that he wasn't a 12-year-old boy, but a monster that had lived for a long time, emitting a dark, cold, and merciless aura from the depths of his soul. Especially when he said that he would use the destruction of the entire town as a threat, it definitely wouldn't just stop at words, but would really put it into action. Why did he suddenly become so tyrannical, filled with the impulse to kill and destroy? Don't understand. Don't understand. Don't understand. In short, this experience of coming into contact with the outside world made Luke completely aware of how different he was from the rest. At the same time, he was even more eager to know from Brolin what he saw when they first met. Also, what was that mysterious crystal that contained the dark blue liquid? Too many questions, too many mysteries. So much so that he didn't notice that Malvina, who had been silent all this time, had a flash of fear in her eyes from time to time. When the cold night passed, and the light and heat emitted by the stars once again brought light and warmth to the world, Luke opened his eyes and suddenly discovered that the girl who needed him to bring her safely back to the tribe's encampment had actually sneaked away under the cover of the night. That's right. Malvina finally chose to run away. Because by Luke's side, she no longer felt familiar and safe, but unfamiliar and dangerous instead. Wasn't it normal for a 12-year-old girl to run away from someone she thought was dangerous? Staring at the footprints that were already covered by the quicksand, Luke finally couldn't hold back the negative emotions that kept surging in the depths of his heart. He kicked away part of the luggage that Malvina left behind and roared in uncontrollable anger. No, no, no. How could she have the guts to walk through the desert alone? It was very obvious that the girl had noticed that he had overdrawn his magic last night. Otherwise, according to her usual vigilance, she definitely wouldn't have had any chance to leave. More importantly, in this dangerous desert, Malvina's skills were far from enough to deal with the various unexpected situations that might occur. In other words, she could die at any time and become the excrement of some monsters. She could also be captured by looters and be cruelly abused before being sold to slave traders. Damn it, what should I do next? Luke rubbed his sore eyes and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear. His first choice was definitely not to return to the tribe's encampment. If Brola knew that his daughter was missing, not only would he not say what he saw, but he would also resent him for not fulfilling the agreement. Secondly, returning to Darazan wasn't a wise choice. After all, he had almost destroyed that place with his own hands. Right now, the entire town's residents would probably view him as their most dangerous enemy. When the time came, situations such as poisoning, sneak attacks, and assassinations would definitely occur. He did not think that he could stay awake for 20 hours to deal with such a dangerous situation. In the end, the only thing he could do was to eliminate the town and the tribe's encampment, and choose one of the other two directions to try his luck. After a simple toss of a metal coin, Luke quickly chose one of the directions and strode forward quickly under the warm morning sun. When his figure gradually disappeared at the end of the horizon, a wave suddenly surged under the calm sand of the encampment. After a short while, Malvina's furry little head popped out from inside. She skillfully picked up the messy luggage and ran in the opposite direction. The clever and quick-witted girl used a little disguise she learned from her father to not only successfully deceive Luke, but also effectively avoided the possibility of being caught. At the same time, far away in Darazan town, the woman with the eye patch was sitting in the corner of a hotel. She raised her head and drank a large cup of dark green drink in one gulp. After about a minute, she let out a long breath and asked her companion, sitting opposite her with an uncertain tone, "Are you sure you want to do this?" "That's right. Here, take a look. This is the price given by the employer." The fox-faced woman pushed a thin piece of animal skin forward. "Damn it. This is a price that can really move people. It's worth gambling with one's life." After glancing at the words on the animal skin, the one-eyed woman couldn't help but take in a breath of cold air. She raised her fist and slammed it on the table. In fact, all the powerful organizations in town have received the same mission. That strange boy's magical talent is too shocking. It's so shocking that even some of the big shots who came from afar are interested. He's like a precious gem that hasn't been carved. With a bit of polishing, he'll release the brightest radiance. He's a true priceless treasure. In the eyes of those who know the ropes, it's worth it no matter how high the price is. The fox-faced woman added meaningfully. In this town that relied on selling slaves and spoils of war to maintain itself, there was nothing that couldn't be traded. Even everyone had a clear price tag on them, as long as the employer could afford it. Even if it was the Dalent who conquered this planet in the past, they would dare to make a move. Understood? Then we'll gamble with our lives. I believe you've seen the terrifying power that boy has, as well as his extreme disregard for life. Once we fail, no matter if it's you or me, there's absolutely no possibility of survival. The one-eyed woman licked her lips and reminded. But don't forget, he's just a child who's lived in isolation from the world since he was young. Perhaps his magical power is enough to easily kill us, but he doesn't have much experience in other areas. We can use his curiosity, his desire, to achieve the employer's request. Most importantly, this is a competitive mission. The other groups will also act together. We can use them to disguise ourselves as victims and successfully join his team. Then we can slowly look for an opportunity. You're still as sinister and cunning as before. A 12-year-old boy should be at the age where he's young and ignorant. If you disguise yourself well enough, perhaps you can really win his trust and goodwill. Then, we'll accept this business? Yes. Go and gather people. This time, I'm afraid we have to put on a good show. Chapter 1267. Plunderers, as the name suggested, were a group of people that didn't produce anything, purely relying on violence to rob and plunder. On this extremely resource-poor planet, people like them could be seen everywhere. Most of them were making their final struggle for survival, but there were also a very small number of them who were enjoying the thrill and pleasure of killing, plundering, and conquering. Normally speaking, a plunderer that had just entered the profession wouldn't live for more than 5 days before dying in a certain operation. Only a few of them could persist for 3 months. But after 3 months, when these newbies gradually learned combat techniques, as well as the complicated tactics of small groups, they would become incomparably terrifying. No pity, no sympathy, No bottom line, not even the most basic self-respect and shame. Anything that could increase the success rate of plundering, whether it was through seduction or other means, they didn't mind trying it. Among them, a small number of lucky plunderers slowly accumulated enough prestige and wealth, and eventually developed and established their own stronghold or town. Then, they attracted the comparatively weaker plunderers to settle in, relying on slave trade and selling stolen goods to maintain their basic operations. Without a doubt, Darazan Town was a classic example of a place established by a group of plunderers. Initially, it was only a small village where a group of ordinary villagers lived. However, the underground water resources they possessed attracted the attention of the looters. One had to know that water resources, especially underground water resources that could be obtained endlessly, were definitely an extremely scarce survival resource in this world. Therefore, without any accidents, all the villagers were slaughtered in a short night. In order to ensure that they wouldn't be leaked, the plunderers didn't leave a single survivor. It could be said that the current Darazan town was completely built on blood and corpses. Water was the foundation of their survival, and those merchants and employers from afar were the prerequisite for this town to prosper. So much so that in order to prevent trade from being affected, the plunderers banded together to set a series of rules that needed to be followed, including not being allowed to rob caravans with special markings. Didn't it sound ironic? A group of people that relied on plundering for a living actually started to protect their former targets. But regrettably, this was the naked reality. At the same time, it was also for the sake of greater benefits and better survival. In Darazan Town, there wasn't a single bandit group that would refuse a generous employer, no matter how excessive the request was or how dangerous the mission was. As a woman with a rather outstanding appearance and figure, Lefany had already learned how to use her innate talent to deal with those barbaric, boorish, and strong men before she reached adulthood. She used their vigorous male desires to achieve unspeakable goals and even instigate fights. But today, what she wanted to do was not to seduce a man who was stronger than her, but to approach a boy who was much smaller than her, but more dangerous than any other man she had ever met before. She didn't even know if her incomparably skilled teasing skills would come in handy. She didn't even know if her beautiful appearance and figure in the eyes of most people would be as attractive to this little fellow of an unknown race. Uneasiness, apprehension, nervous. The closer Lefany got to the boy, the more nervous she became. In addition to the scorching sunlight and the astonishing temperature, she felt as though she had just been fished out of the water. She was drenched in sweat and could only continuously gulp down water to relieve the pressure. Just as she finished drinking an entire jug of water, the one-eyed woman at the front of the group suddenly came to a halt. She raised her hand and gestured for the people behind her to remain silent. She raised the strange device in her hand and looked ahead. After about 2 to 3 minutes, she said with a slightly excited tone, "Uh-huh, we finally caught up to him." "What?" "We caught up." Lefany's pupils contracted abruptly. She hurriedly removed the white cloak draped over her body at the fastest speed possible, revealing a faintly discernible chiffon dress underneath. "That's right. We caught up. But what's interesting is that he's alone now. The canty girl has disappeared," the one-eyed woman explained without turning her head. "What do you mean? Did they split up? Or did something happen that we don't know about?" Another male member of the group asked with furrowed brows. "I'm not sure, but I know that this is an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. No one can endure the loneliness of traversing the vast desert alone. He must be yearning for a companion in his heart. Lefany, tell me, are you ready?" As she spoke, the woman with the eye patch turned around and looked at the most crucial person in this operation. Anyone who had personally witnessed the gigantic meteor that could obliterate an entire town wouldn't feel that violence was a wise choice. Although violence was their forte, it didn't mean that they were useless apart from violence. On the contrary, deception, disguise, and abduction were all veteran raiders' forte. In fact, only the lowest-level raiders would purposely put on a ferocious appearance in an attempt to show off their brutality and strength. They wanted to make their targets feel fear and ultimately achieve the goal of ending the battle with the least number of casualties. After all, slaves were also a part of their income and a relatively large proportion of it. Among them, there were some rare and precious races that possessed special talents. A single slave could be sold for an astonishing amount of wealth that an ordinary raider would never be able to earn in their entire lives. Lefany took a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. Then, she quickly tore her expensive clothes into tatters, and a frightened expression appeared on her face. She softly replied, "I'm ready. Let's begin. Let's put on a good show and take down this valuable prey before the other groups do." "Awesome. Everyone get ready. You can start running. Remember, in order to make it look more realistic, we won't hold back. Don't die." Just as she finished speaking, the one-eyed woman raised her fist and fiercely punched Lefany's left face, causing her beautiful face to swell up, and she spat out a mouthful of dark red blood. "Huh!" Lefany indifferently spat out a mouthful of blood and then threw off her boots. She madly ran barefoot on the scalding sand, her two faintly discernible slender thighs completely exposed to the air. Especially the panic in her eyes, it was as if it was real. Moreover, she didn't forget to look back as she ran. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1268. What was the highest realm of acting? Perhaps some people would tell you to immerse yourself into the character, to treat yourself as the character you were portraying. Others would tell you to pour your emotions into the character you were portraying, to deeply understand the character's love and hatred, and to understand every minute and second of the character's emotional changes. But in the eyes of the veteran raiders, the highest realm of acting was to not act at all, and to act as if the situation was real. After Lefany took the lead and ran for a distance, the guys hiding behind the sand dune raised the weapons in their hands and chased after her without saying a word. In the process of running and chasing, several long-range archers used bows and crossbows to accurately and fatally attack her. In the blink of an eye, 2 arrows pierced through her shoulder and one of her calves. There was even a guy with a strange scepter in his hand who shot out a beam of white light, directly creating a large area of black and red on his back that was severely burned. Without a doubt, these guys did not have the slightest intention of holding back, completely treating Lefany as a true enemy. If she could not attract the attention of the targets before they caught up to her, then it was very likely that she would really be killed on the way. One should not think that there was any friendship or love between raiders. Rather than saying that they were comrades fighting side by side, it was better to say that they were competitors using each other. Every member was a demon that did not hesitate to sacrifice the other members of the same team in order to obtain more wealth, fame, and power. If Lefany could not achieve the performance she promised, then she would have no value in existing. Although it was very cruel, this was the reality, something that the residents of a planet with extremely poor resources had to face. Without any hesitation, when Lefany began to approach the short figure in front of her, she immediately shouted at the top of her lungs, "Run! Run! Child! Don't let these damned bastards catch up to you!" What? Out of his subconscious reaction, Luke immediately turned around and looked at the place where the voice came from. On the boundless golden sand dune, more than a dozen extremely vicious men were chasing after a beautiful woman who was wounded in many places and did not seem to be a threat. "Run! Run! Otherwise, these raiders will kill you." Evidently, Lefany was very proficient in figuring out a man's mind. She knew that she could not take the initiative to ask for help in this kind of situation. Instead, she had to pretend to be considerate of the other party in order to arouse a powerful man's subconscious pride, desire to show off, and desire to protect. This was the only way to ensure that his sudden appearance would not arouse the other party's vigilance. Generally speaking, the younger a child was, the easier it was for them to become arrogant and complacent. They even naively believed that they were the chosen ones and that their values were justice. Therefore, once they saw a situation where the weak were being bullied, they would often step in without distinguishing between right and wrong. Unfortunately, Luke didn't show any intention of interfering at all. Instead, He took the initiative to step aside and watched everything that was happening with a cold expression. No matter how many arrows were stuck in Lefany's body, no matter how much blood she was bleeding, no matter how badly her back was burned by some kind of magic item, she had no intention of interfering. It was clear that the development of the situation had far exceeded the expectations of all the raiders involved in this operation. The one-eyed woman hiding behind a sand dune in the distance clenched her fists nervously, hesitating whether or not she should send out a signal to have the whole team retreat first. But in the next second, a large amount of sand suddenly flowed at high speed, forming a huge whirlpool. The whirlpool spun faster and faster until it became a terrifying meat grinder. It sucked in all the raiders and chewed them into meat paste while they were still alive. When the last scream disappeared, the golden sand was covered in a layer of dark red that emitted a pungent stench. Lefany had already stopped running and stood on the surface of the scalding sand, not daring to move. She pretended to be shocked and pitiful. Of course, it wasn't all an act. At least a part of her shock was real. After all, those people that had just been killed weren't nobodies. Every one of them had at least 20 to 30 lives in their hands. At the same time, they were all infamous villains in the town. But now, they didn't even last a few seconds before dying in the hands of this boy who looked to be in his early teens. "Who are you? Why are they chasing you?" Luke narrowed his eyes and asked. He didn't know why, but from the first time he saw this chase, he immediately felt that something was wrong. But just as Lefany had expected, advancing alone in the desert was really too lonely, too lonely. It wasn't something that an ordinary person could endure. Moreover, he really needed a companion and guide so that he could take turns keeping watch during the night or provide information about the surrounding geography at crucial moments. I am a merchant's daughter. I was following my father's caravan to the next destination. But who would have thought that I would unfortunately run into a group of raiders? Dead. Everyone is dead. Only I'm still alive. Woo-woo-woo. As she spoke, Lefany fell to the ground with a plop and burst into tears. She cried so sorrowfully that her whole body kept twitching. In the end, she directly fainted. But this time, she wasn't pretending. She really couldn't hold on. After all, there were so many arrows stuck in her body, and there were large burn marks. In addition, she had lost a large amount of blood from the intense running. If it had been a robust male, the result would have been the same. "Caravan," Luke muttered to himself while stroking his chin. He immediately bent down to check the wound. He didn't know the result if he didn't check, but when he did, he was shocked. He hurriedly took out the dagger he carried with him and cut off the arrowheads. He pulled out the arrow shafts one by one and applied the hemostatic medicine specially made by the tribe's elders. Because if he didn't do that, this woman definitely wouldn't be able to live for more than 2 hours. She would die in the terrifyingly high-temperature environment. But even if he treated her, whether she could survive or not depended on whether she was blessed by fate. Anyone who reached this level of danger was dancing with the god of death. There were too many factors, such as infection, high body temperature, and so on. They would all end her fragile life without exception. After dealing with everything, Luke chanted an incantation in a low voice and slowly gathered a large amount of sand. He barely managed to condense it into a human form and continued forward while carrying Lefany. He didn't notice that the one-eyed woman hiding behind the sand dune had already curled her lips and revealed a smile of success. Chapter 1269. Those who had never experienced being on the brink of death would never know how wonderful that feeling was. It was as if the senses of one's spirit and will were infinitely magnified, and all the pain left one's body, leaving behind an unprecedented state of emptiness. If one couldn't cross the boundary between life and death and enter another world, a world that belonged to the dead, then one would never be troubled by injuries. But if one could survive, then one would soon wake up and once again experience the feeling of living a life worse than death. Clearly, Lefany was in this stage. Her strong will to survive allowed her to survive the most dangerous day. When evening arrived and the surrounding environment started to rapidly decrease, she finally opened her eyes slowly, only to discover that she was being carried by a magical creature made entirely of sand. and the boy who was her target was slowly advancing toward the golden setting sun. Especially the contrast between his short stature and the huge shadow on the ground. It was simply the most realistic portrayal of reality. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she wouldn't have believed that this small body actually contained such astonishing magical power. You're awake." Luke clearly sensed something. He stopped, turned around, and stared at the other party's deathly pale face. Thank you. Thank you for saving my life." Lefany's voice revealed endless weakness and exhaustion. After all, she had just lost so much blood not long ago, and the reason she was able to wake up so quickly was all due to her innate magical talent. Otherwise, if she were an ordinary raider, she would have already died from the terrifying heat at noon. "You're welcome. The reason I saved you is because I feel that you're useful. If you fail to live up to my expectations, then I can guarantee that you will be left to die in the desert in the next second." Luke's tone was filled with a coldness that kept people at a distance. "What do you need me to do?" Lefany resisted the tiredness that kept assaulting her and carefully probed. She was very clear that this wasn't just a simple verbal threat, but a terrifying threat that could be used at any time. In her current state, not to mention surviving in the dangerous desert, even if she stayed alone for 1 or 2 hours, there was a possibility that she would be eaten as dinner by wild beasts or monsters that smelled the scent of blood. Trust was never established from the start. She needed time, needed to be accompanied day and night, and used her womanly gentleness and consideration to melt this ice. Very simple. Since you are a merchant's woman, you must be very familiar with the surrounding terrain and the roads leading to the various towns, right? Luke didn't try to hide anything, openly stating what he intended to get from the other party. That was right. It was a living map and guide. Because he had been living in the tribal encampment that was isolated from the world, even if the warriors went out to look for drinking water and necessary living materials, they would usually not go near the densely populated towns. Therefore, he had never had a clear understanding of this world. For example, how big was it? Was the desert he was in a huge island, an isolated continent, or the only continent in the whole world? How many people and how many cities were there in this desolate land that was like the end of the world? Did they form a country after the invaders disappeared? Or did they form a political group similar to a country? According to the description of the elders, ever since the invaders mysteriously left, the entire world had been rapidly changing. Many of the former resistance organizations had stepped forward and began to compete for resources, population, and territory. Intelligent beings would never be able to get rid of their selfish nature. As long as self-awareness existed, the struggle for ideology and benefits would never stop. However, this didn't have much to do with Luke. He only wanted to understand the surrounding terrain, especially the densely populated towns. With Malvina's personality, she would definitely choose the nearest town as her destination. Of course, I know the location of all the towns, even those unknown villages that can supply fresh water. Lefany nodded without hesitation. To be honest, when she heard this request, she immediately heaved a sigh of relief. This meant that in the other party's eyes, she was a useful person. Being useful meant that she wouldn't be easily abandoned. At the very least, before she recovered from her injuries, the possibility of her becoming a beast or a monster wasn't high. Very good. Now tell me immediately, which direction can I take to reach the town in the shortest time possible? Luke straightforwardly asked. Lefany raised her head and looked at the stars in the sky that were starting to show faint light, as if she was confirming the direction and location. After a few minutes, she pointed to the left and said, "Follow this direction and you will reach the Bone City in about 20 days. Bone City? Luke subconsciously furrowed his brows. This was because when he was in the tribe's encampment, he had never heard the elders or the warriors who often went out mention this term. Obviously, it was either too far away and wasn't within the tribe's range of concern, or it was too dangerous and no one was willing to easily approach it. Yes, the Bone City. Just like its name, it is an ancient city completely built from the bones of giant beasts. It is said that it dates back to before the invaders came. There is a huge skeletal shrine there, consecrating the great god of the hunt. Those skeletons were the best gifts the fanatical believers could give to the god back then. Lefny hurriedly told him everything she knew. She seemed to be very clear about the importance of first impressions. She tried her best to show off her knowledge of geography and history, unlike those shallow and foolish women who thought that a man would do anything for them as long as they spread their legs. That sounds interesting. Then let's go to the Bone City to take a look. Luke didn't tell Lefny the real reason why he wanted to go to the Bone City. After muttering to himself, he found a relatively sheltered place and prepared to eat some dried meat and dry rations for the night. As most of the land had turned into sand, there were very few crops that could be grown in this world. Most of them were special plants that could only grow underground. As for the texture and taste, it could only be said that it was barely edible and didn't have much nutrition. The most important thing was that it could supplement the body with a small amount of nutrients and vitamins. Otherwise, no one would be willing to eat it. Similarly, the taste of the dried meat wasn't much better. Every bite felt like torture. But no matter what, compared to those fellows who didn't even have food, Luke was already considered lucky. At least when he was growing up, he didn't starve, nor did he die of thirst due to lack of water. Chapter 1270. Luke had always been grateful to the tribe that took him in, even though he knew that they raised him with a strong purpose, hoping that he could become the protector of this small tribe forever. Unfortunately, he had no way to fulfill the wishes of the elders. The older he grew, the more he felt that there was a huge secret hidden in his small body. In order to solve this secret, it was only a matter of time before he had to leave the tribe. For some reason, Luke always had a premonition that on this barren planet, he would finally embrace his true destiny. At the same time, on the distant planet Mocha, the Dalent people, as the main body of the civilization, were busy repairing their most important magical device, the spatial ring. Due to the unknown storm 12 years ago, this thing that was used to connect countless planets, parallel worlds, and subspaces was now in a very inconceivable state of loss of control. Anyone who entered would be transported into nothingness, and then fall into an endless state of freezing. No matter what measures were taken, no matter what kind of magic was used, it could not be restored. Of course, this was not the most bizarre thing. The most bizarre thing was that 12 years ago, when the storm struck, two strange-looking babies appeared out of thin air inside the spatial ring. But later, due to the negligence of a guard, after one of the babies appeared, it was immediately swept into the crack, and no one knew where it ended up. Only the other one was fortunately saved. Through research, the Dalent people found that this rescued baby had a terrifying magical talent that even they could not compare to. No matter how profound the theoretical knowledge and complicated the magical structure was, he could learn it in one go, as if he was born from magic. It must be known that as a mature and advanced civilization, they valued magic as much as modern humans on Earth valued science. Once they found out that other races showed unusual talents, the Dalent people would do everything possible to absorb them into their system and give them honorary titles and enjoy a series of privileges. Even their family members would receive preferential treatment. In this way, they almost captured all the top talents in the area under their rule. There was no doubt that after discovering the great potential of the baby, the Dalent people sent him to a relatively closed environment and taught him knowledge and a set of values day and night. Now, it was time to reap the rewards. The boy, who was wearing a purple robe that symbolized nobility, was standing at an entrance that was filled with turbulent flows of energy. He was continuously casting spells that shocked the surrounding onlookers. After a while, the originally chaotic and manic energy gradually calmed down and began to flow out of the entrance in an extremely orderly manner. Finally, it was sealed in a sealed box. When he was done, he finally let out a sigh of relief. Smiling, he asked a Dalent with a particularly large head beside him, "How is it, my dear Orin? I told you that I found a way to repair the spatial ring. Do you believe me now?" "Yes, I saw it." The guy called Orin nodded with a complicated expression. His eyes were filled with amazement, but at the same time, fear and cowardice. Although this was not the first time he had seen this strange boy create a miracle with his own hands, none of the previous miracles could compare to the repair of the space ring. After all, after the latter had been severely damaged, they had spent a full 12 years and countless manpower and material resources, but they still could not find a way to restore it to normal. Could it be that Dalen's people were too stupid? The answer was obviously not. If they were stupid, they would not have been able to create such a brilliant magical civilization, or even conquer and rule so many worlds and their affiliated subspaces. They were smart, powerful, and an excellent race that surpassed most low-level intelligent life forms. Because of this, there was even a large number of stupid and unfounded blood theories. They believed that the more ancient and traditional a family was, the easier it was to give birth to descendants with excellent magical talent. But now, all these feelings of superiority were easily shattered by the terrifying talent displayed by the boy in front of them. Genius. Unparalleled genius. Especially the innate ability to understand and create. It was like the difference between a mortal and a god. The boy clearly did not realize that he had just completed an unbelievable task. With a proud expression on his young face, he explained to himself, "As everyone knows, the turbulence of energy has always been the biggest problem that troubles spellcasters and countless delicate magical devices. It is like a naughty child, madly destroying the order and stability necessary to cast spells. Under normal circumstances, there are two ways to restore stability. One is to use energy that is far more than 10 times stronger than the turbulence to forcibly suppress it. The other is the result of my latest research. Like coaxing a child, I seduce and separate the unstable elements in the turbulence and then seal them." Very interesting explanation. I admit that you have surpassed me and become one of the few spellcasters on this planet who is qualified to be called star. But the problem is that the method you use requires extremely sharp perception. It is impossible for others to learn and imitate. It will take at least 100 years to repair the entire huge space ring and the worlds it is connected to, Orin said helplessly with emotion. As someone who was born at the peak of the Dalent civilization, he was once filled with an explosive sense of pride. At the same time, he was very clear about the importance of those conquered worlds. Without sufficient resources, planet Mocha would not be able to maintain its current state. In the short 12 years after they lost contact with it, the concentration of magic energy in the air had decreased by nearly 5%. This number might not be enough to be noticed by ordinary Dalent people, but as a member of the privileged class, Orin had clearly noticed it. He could not wait to repair the spatial door and plunder resources and energy from other worlds. "Don't worry, teacher. I will soon perfect the technology at hand. It won't be long before you see this place returning to its former prosperity. I swear." The boy gave his promise confidently. "Ha ha. All right, my proudest disciple. I believe you will fulfill your promise. But before that, I have something to tell you. In fact, you are not alone. You have a twin brother who looks exactly like you. It's just that he was swept into the turbulence and lost in some unknown world." Chapter 1271. Brother? I have a twin brother? Hearing this news, the boy fell into a mixture of surprise, ecstasy, and even a trace of doubt. After a few minutes, he slowly calmed down and asked in an uncertain tone, "Why are you only telling me now?" "Because I wasn't sure if the spatial ring could be repaired before. If it can never be repaired, then whether you have a twin brother or not would be meaningless. But now, since you've mastered the method to repair it, I'll naturally tell you everything," Orin replied calmly. He would never tell the boy that the reason he was chosen by the higher-ups was because he invented a mysterious spell that could silently influence an intelligent life's personality and even thoughts. This spell was not like most mind control spells, which were full of deception, falsehood, distortion, and intense stimulation. On the contrary, it was like a gentle breeze, causing one to be unable to feel the slightest trace of its existence. It could silently and permanently change a person. "What do you want me to do? Or, do you have any plans for my missing brother?" The boy obviously realized something and raised his head to look at his mentor who had taken care of him for 12 years. Orin did not try to hide anything, and straightforwardly revealed the higher-up's plan. "Find him at all costs, then bring him back. If he has the same amazing magical talent as you, such talent should not be wasted. He must become one of us, just like you. I understand. The boy nodded lightly, and then turned to leave the huge building where the spatial ring was located. Watching his back gradually disappear into the distance, another Dalent couldn't help but ask, "Master, are you sure it's not too hasty to tell him the truth so early?" "Hasty? Umph. An idiot like you will never understand how mature his mind and soul are hidden in that small body of his. Some lives are destined to be extraordinary from the moment they are born. It's not something that talent and hard work can make up for. Remember, put away your pitiful thoughts. Even if you do your best and bet your life, you won't be able to achieve 1/10,000th of his future achievements." At this moment, Oren was not as kind as he usually was in front of the boy, and his words were full of vicious ridicule and sarcasm. I'm sorry, idiot. Hurry up and act. Can't you see that the entrance has been repaired? I hope to regain control of the other side of the world in the shortest time possible." "As you wish." After a short conversation, a fully armed army carrying heavy-duty war puppets and a large number of long-range magical weapons passed through the entrance and entered a world completely made up of primeval forests and lakes. Through merciless slaughter, destruction, and conquest, they soon destroyed the new order that the indigenous people had worked so hard to establish over the past 12 years, forcing the stubborn people who tried to resist to crawl on the ground again, becoming tools that the Dalent people could order and enslave. No country or civilization could develop without plundering. However, some ruling classes chose to plunder outward, while others chose to plunder inward. The civilization established by the Dalent was never a peaceful one. Wars, destruction, and plundering ran through almost all of history. Even in many races that disappeared on Mocha were their proud masterpieces. Of course, this had nothing to do with the boy who had returned to his residence. At this moment, he was standing in front of a mirror, looking at his reflection in the mirror. He raised his arm and tried to touch himself in the mirror. He chuckled and muttered to himself, "Brother? I actually have a brother. Where are you? How did you spend the past 12 years? How big is the gap between you and me now? Don't worry, I'll find you soon." As the last word came out of his mouth, the boy immediately turned around and began his intensive research and optimization work. He was very clear that the only way to find his brother whom he had never met was to repair the various entrances in the Ring of Space as much as possible and restore the connections between the isolated worlds so that the army that was ready to move out could occupy and conquer those worlds again. As for whether the resources of these worlds would be mercilessly plundered and whether the residents would die in large numbers because of this, it was none of his business. Far away on another resource-poor planet, Luke did not know that he had a brother who was busy looking for him. He raised his head and admired the skull of an unknown giant beast in front of him. He asked in a tone full of surprise, "What kind of animal is this? Does such a huge life form really exist in this world?" "Orbis. It's a legendary giant beast that can bring disaster to an entire city. The people who had the ability to kill it back then were all the most powerful heroes of their era without exception," Lefny replied while licking her cracked lips. "Interesting. Then what about now? Are there any traces of its existence?" Luke continued to ask with great interest. One had to know that this huge skull was the most important component of the Bone City gate. Just its height alone exceeded 60 meters, and its width reached an astonishing 100 meters. In particular, those terrifying teeth made the tall guards look as laughable as lowly ants in front of them. They've already gone extinct. In the face of the powerful invaders, no matter how powerful a life form was, it would be difficult to escape death in the end. Fortunately, they suddenly disappeared all of a sudden 12 years ago. Otherwise, this world would be even worse. Lefny's face revealed a lingering fear. Invaders? 12 years ago, Luke acutely sensed the possible connection between the two. Combining his age with the small amount of information he obtained from Brolin, everything seemed to suddenly become clear. Firstly, he first appeared in the magical fortress built by the Dalent people. Secondly, his appearance seemed to have caused some kind of disaster, causing these invaders to suffer a calamity of annihilation, where they had no choice but to temporarily hide. Lastly, And most importantly, what exactly did that crystal filled with dark blue liquid mean? After all, ever since Luke obtained that thing, he had been trying to open it. But no matter what method he used, the layer of crystal wrapped around it was as solid as a rock. Not to mention cracks, not even the slightest bit of friction or scratch was left behind. Chapter 1272. What's in here? What does it have to do with my origins? Luke subconsciously touched the crystal that had been made into a pendant and hung around his neck, a deep glint in his eyes. For some reason, he couldn't sense any energy fluctuations from here, not even a trace of its existence. The blue liquid was like a visual illusion, an illusion made entirely of light and shadow. Evidently, Lefny didn't know what this boy who grasped great magic power was thinking. She cautiously reminded, "We are now exposed to the sight of the Bone City's guards. You better make a decision quickly. Do you want to enter the city, or turn around and leave? After all, this isn't an ordinary city, but the only remaining city of faith in this world." City of faith? Luke raised his head and looked at the city gates and walls made of countless white bones, his face revealing a disapproving expression. In fact, when the elders of the tribe recounted the history of this world, whenever they recounted the story of the gods with a nostalgic tone, his heart was filled with contempt and disdain. Even though he himself didn't know why this contempt and disdain came from, why he would look down on a supernatural being that was countless times more powerful than himself for no reason. That's right, City of Faith, because this place has never been attacked or destroyed by invaders. The huge shrine in the center still retains some extremely mysterious power, and this power has attracted countless fanatical worshippers. If you show even the slightest disrespect to their faith, these guys will attack like madmen. Unless you are a general of death, they won't stop. When she said these words, Lefny clearly trembled, her eyes filled with reverence and fear. Oh, it sounds like they have forgotten the taste of fear. It doesn't matter. If things are really bad to a certain extent, I don't mind teaching them again. After saying this, Luke took the lead and passed through the skull of the giant beast. After paying an expensive entrance tax to the guards at the gate, they finally entered this rather famous city. The spacious streets, the quiet and orderly residents, no beggars, no slaves. There was no dying and numb cripple. Everything looked like a complicated and precise clock, operating according to a predetermined pattern. It was a stark contrast to the chaos and the cruel reality of the desert outside, where the strong preyed on the weak. Unbelievable. How do the rulers of this place feed their hungry mouths? And how do they maintain order? Luke's voice was filled with curiosity. He couldn't help but be curious. Judging from the scale and population density, the Bone City had at least 50 to 60,000 residents. In a world that had almost exhausted all its resources, it was theoretically impossible to support such a dense population while at the same time ensuring enough clean water and food. Not to mention tens of thousands of people, even the place where he grew up, which could only support 100 or so people. Like I said, this place is different from other places. It still retains some inconceivable mysterious power. An inexhaustible pool. Just as Luke began to ponder whether this was caused by special geographical conditions, or if the pool was connected to some other plane, a man in a gray robe suddenly blocked their path. He held up a cane carved from an unknown bone and asked in a rather solemn voice, "Outsider, have you felt the call of the Great Consciousness?" The Great Consciousness? Luke blinked his eyes in confusion. Yes, the Great Consciousness. It is the precious spiritual wealth left behind by the fallen gods of ancient times. It is the only hope that can save us. Come, feel it, accept it, and let it become the pillar of your heart. Only in this way can you receive benevolent salvation. Our world will soon be destroyed. Only those who are saved by the Great Consciousness will have a chance to survive. The man in the gray robe raised his hands high, and he seemed to have entered a state of extreme fanaticism. But what was even more shocking was that when the originally quiet residents heard this, they all knelt down and raised their hands high, loudly chanting some inexplicable praises. They were all exactly the same as the former. Crazy? Foolish? Stupid? or mentally unstable. In short, from the moment Luke crossed the city gate, he felt that this place was very strange. But before he could refute the other party, Lefney immediately gave him a look and knelt down on one knee. Pretending to be very devout, she replied, "You are right. We have felt the great consciousness. From today onwards, I am willing to become its most loyal believer and spread its salvation and glory." Very good. The great consciousness will watch over you. After seeing Lefney's sincere gaze, the lunatic finally revealed a satisfied smile. He turned around and continued walking along the wide street. After he walked far away, Luke frowned and questioned, "Why are you doing this? You don't believe in the existence of that so-called great consciousness. In order to reduce unnecessary conflicts. You don't understand. If we don't show respect to this great consciousness here, then lunatics like him will pester us endlessly and even resort to violence. Perhaps you possess powerful magic power, but don't forget that he is not a single person, but a huge organization." Lefney lowered her voice and explained, "You mean the rulers of Bone City are a bunch of swindlers like that guy?" Luke seemed to have realized something, and the corners of his mouth rose. "More or less." Lefney nodded lightly. "In fact, the ones who rule this city are an organization called the Church of Doomsday. They preach that the end of the world is imminent, and only by accepting the salvation of the great consciousness can one survive. Do you see those residents? They are all devout believers who have gone through many tests and receive enough food and water to survive every day. Dual control of mind and matter? Interesting. I am starting to become more and more interested in this so-called great consciousness." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1273. After the brief interlude, the two did not stop on the road for too long. They went straight to an inn that was still open for business. Even though the rulers of the Bone City were a bunch of fanatical religious lunatics, they did not place too many restrictions on trade. In addition, this city had relatively cheap fresh water and an astonishing amount of food. Even if the merchants did not like the environment and atmosphere here, they would not reject wealth and benefits. The moment Luke walked into the small inn, he immediately saw a dozen people dressed completely different from the locals outside. While eating and drinking, they whispered to each other and exchanged information. When they saw that it was a boy and a beautiful woman who had walked in, a hint of greed flashed in the eyes of some of them, but they quickly covered it up. After all, this was not a city with lax security management, nor was it a lawless wilderness. It was an orderly city of discipline, under the control of fanatical religion. Anyone who wanted to commit murder and robbery, or even capture slaves, would have to consider the painful price they would have to pay. There were no prisons here. Those who broke the rules and laws usually only had two outcomes. One was to be sent to underground farms and ranches to work for the rest of their lives. They might not even see the light of day until they died. The other was to be hanged in public. Their corpses would also be thrown to the underground farms and ranches to be used as fertilizer. Simple, violent, but it had an unimaginably great deterrence. After booking a room with the innkeeper, Lefney skillfully ordered 2 servings of food. She then sat at a table in the corner of the hall and started eating. As she ate, she calmly probed, "Can you tell me, what are you planning to do in a Bone City?" "It's simple. I'm looking for someone." Luke did not try to hide anything. He openly stated the purpose of his trip. "Looking for someone? Who?" Lefney hurriedly swallowed the food in her mouth and asked. Even though she had more or less figured out the situation along the way, she still wanted to hear it from Luke himself. "A willful canner girl. Help me find her, and we'll be even." As he spoke, Luke took out a gemstone that emitted a faint red light. "Here, take it with you. If that girl appears nearby, the gemstone will continuously flash. The higher the frequency, the closer she is." Magic item? Sensing the faint magical energy emitted by the gemstone, Lefney was clearly surprised, but she quickly added, "I need some money to gather information." "No problem. Here's all the money I have on me. Take it all." Without any hesitation, Luke tossed the heavy pouch filled with all sorts of currencies over. This world had lost most of its resources to the invaders. At the same time, The order and governance structure were on the verge of collapse. Therefore, there was no uniformity or a common currency recognized by most cities and regions. Almost every capable city would have their own currency, and the material used to make it was hard metal. Don't think that these coins are precious metals that are light and easy to carry. On the contrary, they were blocks that could be processed into weapons, armor, or other raw materials at any time. In this harsh world, most of the precious metals had already been extracted by the invaders. What was left was not enough to support a massive trade system. All for me? Aren't you afraid that I'll run away with the money? Lefny glanced at the variety and quantity of the coins in the pouch, and her mouth was wide open in shock. Believe me, you'd better pray that you don't do that. Otherwise, I guarantee that you'll realize how stupid of a mistake you've made before you even escape the city gate. All right, hurry up and get moving. I don't wish to stay in this oppressive city for too long. After saying these meaningful words, Luke quickly finished his portion of food and disappeared alone at the end of the stairs leading to the guest room. Not long after he left, a stranger wrapped in a cloak suddenly walked in from outside. After casually ordering some food, he sat down on the table behind Lefny. As the two had their backs to each other, neither of them could see each other's face. After quietly finishing all the food, the stranger asked in a low voice without turning his head, "How is it? Is it safe now?" "It's safe. He just wanted the guest room upstairs. He shouldn't be coming down for a while." Lefny replied without thinking. When the stranger heard this, he immediately let out a sigh of relief. He raised his head slightly, revealing a valiant female face. It was the one-eyed woman who had been following behind him all this time. Without the slightest hesitation, she directly took out a small bottle of black liquid from her bosom and lightly placed it on the table. She quickly said, "This is poison. Find an opportunity to put it in his food or drink. Remember, you only have one chance. You must make sure that he drinks it all." "Damn it, aren't you too impatient? I haven't won his trust yet. Don't you see? He hasn't done anything intimate with me from start to finish." When Lefny saw the bottle of black liquid, her pupils abruptly shrunk, and she refuted in exasperation. "There's no other way. Our employer doesn't have much time left for us. We must settle this as soon as possible. Otherwise," at this point, the one-eyed woman paused for a moment. Her entire body began to tremble slightly. "Otherwise, the shadow of death will come. The shadow of death." Lefny instantly trembled. "Who on earth is our employer? They actually managed to invite him out. Sorry, I don't know. But if we can't settle this before the shadow of death arrives, then all our efforts and sacrifices will be in vain." As soon as she finished speaking, the one-eyed woman immediately stood up and left the inn. In the blink of an eye, she disappeared at the end of the street. Lefny didn't say anything else. She stood up, and while no one was paying attention, she hid the small bottle of expensive and fatal poison in her sleeve. As a spellcaster, no one knew better than her how terrifying this black liquid was. Under normal circumstances, only one drop was needed to sever the connection between an extremely powerful spellcaster and magic energy. If it was an entire bottle, no matter how powerful Luke was, he would instantly degenerate into a true, defenseless 12-year-old boy. Chapter 1274. Nervousness, fear, uneasiness. Ever since she obtained the poison, Lefny had been tossing and turning in bed, unable to sleep for several days. She had tried several times to pour the black liquid into Luke's food, but when it came to it, she chose to give up. Of course, this wasn't because she had found her conscience, or because she had fallen in love with this extremely cold boy, but because she wasn't sure if he had the ability to distinguish between strong poisons. One had to know that when they were stumbling through the endless desert, she had tried to test things out. She had pretended to accidentally mix some non-fatal poisonous substances into the food, but Luke seemed to be able to sense it and threw away the poisonous parts. He didn't question her, nor did he explain anything. It was to the point that Lefny couldn't tell for a long time whether the parts he threw away were some mysterious ability, magic, or just because he didn't like the taste of food. In her eyes, Luke's entire body was emitting an unfathomable fog, and even his daily actions seemed to contain a deeper meaning. The longer she interacted with him, the more she didn't dare to act rashly. Because Lefany understood that if her sinister intentions were exposed, what awaited her wouldn't be simple death, but an even more terrifying end. In contrast, Luke was much more indifferent. After giving out the mission to find Malvina, he seemed to have forgotten about it. Every day, he would either hide in his room to rest or wander around the streets of Bone City. No one knew that in the dead of night, he would change into another set of clothes and sneak into the temple at the center of the city, built from hundreds of millions of bones. Are these the bones of all kinds of creatures, even intelligent creatures? It's hard to imagine how crazy, dark, twisted, and evil a god would allow his believers to build his own temple in such a ghastly manner. Accompanied by soft muttering, Luke's short figure appeared out of thin air in the most inconspicuous corner of the temple. Because he had made perfect preparations beforehand, even concealing an inconspicuous coordinate in the corner, his arrival didn't alarm anyone. Without a doubt, the lunatic he had met on the street who gave off a fanatical religious aura had made him intensely interested in this temple, as well as the so-called Great Will. Normally speaking, fanatical beliefs had to comply with two objective factors. One was the systematic and complete religious system, as well as the power of order that maintained its operation. The other was the feedback from a powerful supernatural power. This power could be divine power, divine spells, or some other unknown power. In short, mortals were often very realistic. They would never fall into madness or even forget themselves for something that did not bring them any benefits. Only those who could benefit from it would be willing to pay a huge price for it. It was obvious that the ordinary citizens of Bone City were devout and fanatical because of the free food and water provided every day. After all, they knew best that if their faith was unable to pass the test, then they would be expelled and return to their previous precarious state of being robbed and sold as slaves. But what Luke couldn't understand was why these priests and monks in the ruling class were willing to waste so many precious resources to feed a bunch of burdens that couldn't produce any economic benefits. That was right. In his eyes, most of the residents of the Bone City were like parasites, sucking blood from the arteries of this mysterious temple, but they couldn't create any value. After a few days of secret investigation, he had basically figured out the internal structure of the temple. First, the part that connected the entrance and the main hall, which was the part that most of the believers could see. Originally, there was a huge statue here, but it was later destroyed by someone, leaving only a huge pedestal. Above the pedestal, there was a huge crystal that exuded a dark blue light. This crystal was the manifestation of the Great Will mentioned by the priests and monks. However, Luke knew that this was just an ordinary natural crystal that was constantly emitting light. It was a small trick to fool the people. Secondly, it was located in the back half of the temple where the senior clergy rested, held meetings, and stored important resources. In particular, there are several warehouses that were filled with a large number of weapons, armors, and magic items. If all of them were distributed, they could instantly arm an army of thousands of people. Finally, it was the place he was going to explore today. It was located at the end of the secret passage under the temple. According to legend, the inexhaustible pool of water should be inside. Filled with intense curiosity, Luke quickly passed through the dark and narrow passageway, using his illusion to deceive the eyes of several guards. In the end, he finally discovered a deep and gloomy light reflected from the karst cave in front of him. At the same time, there was the sound of splashing water. It was water. Excited, he hurriedly quickened his pace. When he came to the side of the pool, he fell into a state of shock. This was because the pool wasn't filled with water at all. It was a mixture of corpses, blood, and souls. The pungent smell was enough to make any sane person vomit on the ground. But just as he covered his mouth and nose and was about to retreat, a miracle happened. He saw that the pungent smell in the pool suddenly disappeared. The corpses, blood, and souls were also squeezed and torn by an unknown force, decomposing into energy states that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. Then, These energies gathered together and tore open a portal that led to the location. The next second boom, accompanied by a deafening roar, clear spring water poured directly into the bottomless pool from the crack, washing away all the corpses and flesh that were originally left in it. After the crack closed, a water source that could supply the entire city for at least a few weeks to a month or two was replenished. Feeling the cries of the lingering souls in the air, Luke narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself, "So that's how it is. This is a magic formation, an evil sacrificial magic formation. By sacrificing the blood, lives, and souls obtained after torturing and killing, it opens a crack that leads to another world. Rather than saying that those monks are feeding a useless population, it's better to say that they are rearing cattle and sheep that can be slaughtered at any time. In their eyes, the citizens of the city are necessary consumables that can be used in exchange for the source of life, water. As the saying goes, there's no free lunch in this world." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1275. The City of Faith? The City of Discipline? In the end, they still can't escape from the dark side of human nature. The salvation of the great will? I wonder what the ordinary citizens will think when they find out the truth. Luke's tone was full of sarcasm. After fully understanding how cruel the outside world was, he understood that even if the truth here was revealed, most of the residents who were kept in the dark would choose to turn a blind eye and continue to bury their heads in the sand, believing that the great consciousness would save them. It might sound stupid, but this was the cold, hard reality. After all, no matter what, the priests and monks were giving out free food and water, and at the same time, mobilizing forces to maintain order and defend against the raiders everywhere. Although they had to pay a price, this price was acceptable in the face of the cruel reality that was close to despair. Once they left the protection of the church, more than 60% of the elderly, women, and children in the Bone City would die, and the rest would be reduced to slaves for the rest of their lives. But now, they only needed to hypnotize themselves to believe that the Great Will really existed, and then they would be able to receive enough food and water to survive without having to worry about the slaughter and destruction that would befall them at any time. As for the sacrifice, it might not be their turn, and even if it was their turn, they could only blame it on their bad luck. In short, in order to survive, most lives had no bottom line. No matter how lowly, cowardly, or lowly, as long as they could survive, it was enough. Without a doubt, the truth of the bottom floor of the church had completely destroyed Luke's last hope for this city, and he once again blended into the darkness. This time, he did not directly return to his room in the inn, but went to the bedroom of the church's leader. Standing at the head of the bed, Luke quietly looked at the old man lying on the white sheets. After a full minute, he patted the old man's cheek and called out softly, "Wake up, Bishop. I hope you can answer a few of my questions." Who are you?" The old man, who was suddenly awakened from his deep sleep, immediately pulled out a magic pendant that emitted a green fluorescent light from under his pillow. "Relax. I'm just a traveler. I don't plan to do anything to you. Moreover, do you think this magic pendant that stores the death ray can really hurt me?" Saying that, Luke lifted his finger and lightly tapped it. Instantly, countless cracks suddenly appeared on the magic gem on the pendant, like a spider web. Finally, it exploded with a bang. The bishop's pupils shrank as he hurriedly threw away the pendant in his hand. He subconsciously swallowed his saliva and carefully probed, "What do you want to ask?" "It's simple. Tell me, whose masterpiece is that sacrificial array down there? Don't tell me that it's a relic from ancient times. If I'm not wrong, it was built less than 300 years ago." Luke went straight to the point. Perhaps for many ordinary people with short lifespans, 300 years was enough for them to forget many things, or even reproduce more than 10 generations. But for the Cantor tribe, who kept a relatively complete historical record, the true ancient times could only be traced back to thousands of years before the invaders arrived. If the temple in the Bone City was as old as it was described, then there shouldn't be a sacrificial array that was only 300 years old under it. That was built for us," the bishop replied with a trembling voice. Who Luke was obviously not satisfied with this answer, and he took the initiative to take a step forward. It's a group of mysterious people. I'm sorry, I don't know where they came from. I only know that the founder of the church made a deal with them. As for the content, it's what you saw tonight. We have to sacrifice a batch of tortured corpses and souls every once in a while. The bishop was obviously frightened, and he blurted out the biggest secret of the city and the church without hesitation. Mysterious people? Yes, mysterious people. It said that when they appeared, they were covered in black cloaks from head to toe. They were also very tall, and it was impossible to tell what race they were. During the construction process, they forbade anyone from entering. I'm very sorry, but that's all I know. Please don't kill me. If I die, the order of the city will collapse because of the conflict between the church's leaders. Countless people will die because of this. The bishop knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. No one wanted to die, especially those who had great wealth and power and lived luxurious lives that ordinary people could not even imagine. Don't worry, I said I won't kill you, so there's no need to use the citizens of this city as a bargaining chip. What's more, if I really wanted to kill you, do you think I would care about the lives of the ordinary people outside? No, I don't care. I'm even willing to send them to another world with my own hands to end their miserable and painful lives. Well, today's conversation ends here. If I have any other questions, I'll come to you again. Finally, good night, Your Eminence. May the great will redeem your greedy, ugly, and filthy soul when the end of the world comes. After saying this meaningful sentence, Luke turned around and disappeared at the corner of the corridor. He was like a shadow, and no one could see him wherever he went. When he successfully left the temple, the bishop who was sitting on the bed finally breathed a sigh of relief. He quickly opened the drawer and took out a silver mirror from the hidden compartment inside and activated the ruby inlaid on it. The next second, the image of a slender Dalent with a disproportionate head and eyes appeared on the mirror. He scanned the room, and after confirming that there were no outsiders, he asked, "What happened? Didn't I warn you not to contact me unless you have no other choice?" "I'm sorry, Great Master. I really have something important to tell you. Just now, a guy who claimed to be a traveler found the sacrificial circle you built 300 years ago." The bishop knelt on the floor and explained without looking up. "And then? Did he threaten you? Or did he destroy the circle?" The Dalent continued to ask with furrowed brows. The bishop quickly shook his head. "No, he didn't. The strangest thing is that he could have threatened me, or even killed me, but for some reason, he just left." "Left? Interesting." The Dorentian's face was filled with interest. "How about this? I'll send someone to investigate. During this time, don't act rashly because something big is about to happen in the Bone City." Chapter 1276. What happened? In an underground palace shimmering with white light, a Dalent who was passing by asked his companion who was standing in front of a magic mirror. Since 12 years ago, when the connection between the spatial ring and this world was cut off, all the survivors quickly gathered together with the help of powerful magic and built this place called Sanctuary. Just as its name suggested, this place was originally a warehouse used to store important supplies. But in order to prevent the rebels from realizing that they had no backup, they decisively abandoned all the conspicuous castles and magic fortresses and moved from the light to the dark. However, this did not mean that the greedy and cruel Dalent had given up on their ambition to rule this world. On the contrary, after they moved from the light to the dark, they made use of their almost unparalleled magical power and endless means to easily infiltrate the native residents. They even supported several forces and used agents to achieve their unspeakable goals. Obviously, the church in the Bone City happened to be one of them. The Darantian who had just ended the conversation with the bishop shrugged nonchalantly. "It's nothing. It seems that a little mouse discovered our experiment under the Bone City Temple." "Oh, the creative magic circle that is said to be able to convert flesh and soul into energy and store it?" The bishop's face showed an expression of interest. "Yes, that's the one. Although it's just a failed product, it has now become one of the most important energy sources of the sanctuary. We have to deal with it." The bishop nodded without hesitation. "Sounds interesting. Who do you plan to send? Don't forget, it's not suitable for us to appear in the outside world. No, I don't need to send anyone. Don't forget, the alchemy creation that is still in the experimental stage is near the Bone City. Just send it to solve the problem. We are higher beings with wisdom and power, not the barbaric, ignorant, and stupid lower beings out there. Remember, no matter how long the spatial ring has been closed, you and I must believe that it will open again one day. Thank you for your advice. I'm a little bored in this dark place, so I can't help but want to go out and have a look. Bear with it a little longer. According to the ultra-long distance communication from a mother planet not long ago, a genius has found a way to repair the energy turbulence. I believe that in our lifetime, we will be able to once again become the supreme ruler of this planet. By then, I will be very happy to see the expressions on the faces of the idiots who are still fighting for power, territory, and resources after the invincible army of the Imperium shows up. Ha ha! Just as the two gallant people were imagining their beautiful future, Luke, who hadn't rested for the entire night, finally returned to the guest room. He lay alone on the hard wooden bed, his eyes staring straight at the ceiling. Although his body was beginning to feel tired, his mind was unusually active. His mind was full of memories and thoughts about the sacrificial array. This was because the magical symbols and techniques on it were obviously a completely different system from the knowledge taught by the elders. This also meant that either the knowledge passed down from generation to generation was too limited to the extent that they didn't understand the other magical systems of the outside world, or this technique came from the invaders who disappeared 12 years ago. According to the elders' description, these invaders possessed a terrifying magical power that even the gods trembled in fear. In less than a year after the invasion began, they had slaughtered all the gods. As a boy who was full of curiosity and thirst for knowledge, Luke was undoubtedly very interested in this evil sacrificial array. After lying down for a while and realizing that he couldn't sleep, he simply sat up and took out a pen and a scroll made from the leather of a certain animal from his backpack. He then perfectly restored the entire array according to his memory. As for the ink used for writing, it was made from animal blood. Even after being processed, it still emitted a pungent stench all the time. Fortunately, Luke was already used to this smell. He stared at the pattern on the scroll and seriously thought about the meaning and use of each symbol. But before he could think of any clues, the room's door was gently pushed open with a creak. Lefney walked in with a steaming hot meal and carefully placed it on the table. Please eat while it's hot. I believe you must be hungry now. Oh, how do you know I'm hungry? Luke put down the things in his hands and turned around to stare meaningfully at this woman who matched his aesthetic standards. It's the swollen bags under your eyes. Anyone who sees this will understand that you didn't rest at all last night. Lefney pretended to be relaxed as she explained. In fact, Luke wasn't the only one who didn't sleep at night. Lefney also didn't rest well these past few days. However, compared to Luke's face that didn't have any disguise, she had applied a lot of makeup and other things to cover her face. Otherwise, her situation wouldn't be much better. I see. Luke rubbed his slightly dry eyes and shook his head with a nonchalant smile. Just as he was about to pick up the bowl and drink a big mouthful of the hot soup to warm his stomach, he suddenly realized that Lefney's legs were extremely tense, giving off a feeling that she would pounce on him at any moment. After noticing this, he deliberately paused for a moment and raised his head to probe. How's the taste of today's soup? It's excellent. I promise. Lefney hurriedly responded with extreme speed. Although she tried her best to make herself appear less nervous, there were some things that couldn't be solved by just thinking about it. Especially in order to deal with emergency situations, every inch of the muscles in her lower body was ready for battle. If the other party didn't drink this bowl of soup, she would definitely rush up at the first moment and force down the poisoned soup. Only in this way would she have a sliver of a chance of victory. Is that so? Then I'm really looking forward to it. Saying this, Luke brought the bowl to his mouth and looked as if he was going to raise his head and drink it in one gulp. But in the next second, he suddenly splashed the entire bowl of soup on the face of the woman who was close to him. Then, he raised his other hand and quickly completed an attack incantation. Boom! Along with the sound of an explosion and bright orange flames, Lefany was thrown to the ground by the powerful shockwave. A few drops of a seasoned soup also splashed into her mouth. No! Feeling the delicious taste in her mouth, Lefany's expression instantly became incomparably unsightly. She couldn't help but let out a crazy and unwilling roar. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1277. Tell me, who exactly are you? Why did you approach me? Also, what did you add to the soup? Luke's eyes flickered with a dangerous glint as he stared at Lefany, who was struggling to get up from the ground. Clearly, from the very beginning, he did not believe this person who came out of nowhere and claimed to be a merchant's daughter. The reason was simple. He could sense weak, magical energy ripples from her body. This also meant that the seemingly weak and harmless woman before him might actually be a spellcaster. Here came a question. Since she was a spellcaster, why was she being chased by a group of bandits with mediocre strength? Could it be that the caravan did not hire enough guards? Or could it be that those guards were too useless? Even with the help of a spellcaster, they were still unable to defeat a group of bandits? Most importantly, even though her magical energy was not exhausted, why didn't she release some magic to confuse the enemy or create some trouble for the enemy and slow down the speed of their pursuit? There were too many suspicious points, enough for Luke to have a strong sense of wariness. In fact, from the very beginning, his attitude towards Lefany was to make use of her. He wanted to make use of this rather knowledgeable, wounding woman to help him find the little kitty that escaped. But unfortunately, Malvina did not seem to be in the Bone City, so the search quickly came to a standstill. Sensing the aura of death assaulting her, Lefany quickly realized that she was faced with a choice. If she made the wrong choice, death would come as expected. After hesitating for a while, she finally clenched her teeth and replied, "I am a member of a bandit team. Our team recently received a commission from an employer requesting us to bring you back alive and hand you over to them. If we complete this mission, not only will we receive enough wealth to last us for the rest of our lives, we will also be able to choose a big city and obtain the corresponding citizen status to settle down permanently." Bandits? You came from Darazan town. Luke's pupils suddenly contracted, following which a monstrous rage surged from the bottom of his heart. He was like a volcano that was about to erupt. Never in his wildest dreams did he expect that after displaying a terrifying magic that could destroy a city, there would still be a reckless person who dared to set their sights on him. That's right. Also, there's a woman in our team who wears an eye patch. I believe you're not unfamiliar with her. Lefany straightforwardly sold out her teammate. Needless to say, in order to fight for that last chance of survival, she didn't care about the life and death of her teammates. Betrayal was a common occurrence in the Marauders organization. Sometimes, as long as the process of betrayal was spectacular enough, it could even win the respect and praise of its peers. Oomph, how reckless. Where's she? Luke subconsciously clenched his fists and asked loudly. I'm sorry, I don't know where she is hiding. Our communication has always been one way, and she was the one who contacted me. If you really want to catch him, I suggest you put on a show with me. But the condition is that you have to let me go after the deed is done. Exchanging her life for mine is very fair, isn't it? Levani resisted the dizziness that kept coming from the depths of her mind and took the initiative to propose a deal. She understood that this was the sign of the poison acting up. And at most a few minutes, the magic energy in her body would enter hibernation, and she would not be able to release any magic. Not to mention magic, even standing would be a luxury. Therefore, before that, she had to preserve her life. Otherwise, when the poison acted up, she would be a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Give me a reason to let you go. Luke was undoubtedly in a fit of anger. He suddenly condensed a large hand completely made of energy and grabbed the woman's neck, lifting her into the air. I know many secrets, but I can help you deal with the shadow of death that is about to arrive. The feeling of suffocation caused Levani great pain, and she was only able to stutter out a complete sentence with great difficulty. Shadow of death? Luke instantly released his control over the energy hand. Levani fell to the ground with a bang. While coughing, she explained, Cough, 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 cough. That's right, the shadow of death. No one knows what he looks like, and no one has seen how he kills people. But as long as there is a mission given to him by his employer, he can complete it 100%. So far, no one has been able to escape from his hands. In the eyes of the marauders, he is an immortal legend, a monster that can scare off an army with just his name. You mean, someone hired him to kill me? Luke raised his eyebrows in surprise. This was the first time he realized that he was so valuable that someone was willing to pay a high price to hire a top expert who had established his own legend in the industry. Kill you? Ha ha ha. No. How could anyone be willing to kill you? The employer obviously wants to capture you alive. Then, he will turn you into his most loyal subordinate, or perhaps even a slave. You simply don't realize how astonishing your magic talent is, right? If I were you, I would rather commit suicide than be captured alive. Because the process of being trained and brainwashed is the process of completely shattering your self-esteem, pride, and even your personality. For some reason, Levani began to laugh without restraint. Luke wasn't very sure if she was just trying to scare him in order to survive, or if she really knew the outcome of being captured alive. He immediately sank into deep thought. After a few minutes, when Levani's body began to twitch uncontrollably, he nodded lightly. I can promise to let you go, but you have to play a crucial role in the following. Don't worry, dear. I won't disappoint you. Now, please make your body a little dirty, then lie on the ground and don't move. Levani seemed to be in extreme pain. She clenched her teeth and finished speaking with great difficulty. As you wish. Luke didn't say anything else. He poured the leftover food on the table onto his clothes, then lay down and closed his eyes, pretending to be in a deep coma. Because he hadn't rested for the entire night, his complexion looked extremely unhealthy. It was exactly the same as the symptoms after being poisoned. Levani didn't say anything else. She endured the indescribable pain and limped open the window. She threw a piece of meat bone that was originally in the soup onto the windowsill outside. After doing all this, she leaned against the wall and sat on the ground, exhausted. She gasped for breath, while sweat continuously dripped down from her forehead. If she could, she would rather close her eyes and sleep right now. She didn't have to endure any more torture. But in order to survive, she had to persevere and finish this play. Just like how she had gambled her life in the desert not long ago. Chapter 1278. Without a doubt, as the leader of a raider team, the one-eyed woman was definitely not a fool. Otherwise, she would have long since died in an intense battle, or had her throat slit by a dagger from behind. On the contrary, she was more cautious than anyone else. She would always try her best to stay away from danger, and would only reveal herself after confirming that it was safe. In order to confirm the situation in the room of the inn, she had used a small amount of metal coins to entice a 7- or 8-year-old child to come closer and observe, before describing the situation in words. After repeating this several times, she carefully passed through the narrow corridor on the second floor and stuck out half of her head to observe the situation in the room through the crack in the door. When she noticed Luke lying on the ground, as well as Lefany, who was leaning against the wall and panting heavily, she immediately pushed open the door gently and asked with an uncertain tone, "Is everything settled?" "Of course, just like what I promised before." Lefany endured the pain and replied, "Excellent. Beautifully done. But your condition doesn't seem too good, could it be?" The woman wearing the eye patch seemed to have noticed the pale face and sweating forehead of her companion, and a meaningful smile immediately appeared on her face. "In order to eliminate the target's wariness, I ate the poisoned food with him. If you want to take advantage of this moment to kill me and take the reward for yourself, I guarantee that you will regret it." Lefany obviously knew what this smile meant, and her pupils suddenly contracted. Betrayal and deception were as common as eating and drinking among the members of a raider team. This was especially so when a mission was completed and the reward had yet to be handed over to the employer. It was often the time when internal strife would occur. In addition, she had lost the ability to resist due to the poison and could easily become the target of abandonment and sacrifice. The only thing worth rejoicing over was that she had already chosen to betray first. Thinking of this, Lefany subconsciously shot a glance at the motionless Luke from the corner of her eyes, and a playful radiance flashed in her eyes. Take the reward for yourself? No, no, no. My dear friend, you seem to have misunderstood something. In fact, the employer doesn't only want this boy, you are also one of the targets. The woman wearing the eye patch grinned, her face full of sarcasm. What? I'm also a target? Because she was too shocked, Lefany seemed to have forgotten the pain in her body and struggled to stand up. This was because she was the one who had accepted this mission. Even the bee skin that was filled with the details of the mission did not mention anything related to her from beginning to end. It's incredible, isn't it? In fact, when the mysterious employer contacted me later, I was also very surprised. But you should know that no one can refuse the price he offers. So I'm sorry, I have to take responsibility for the rest of my life. The one-eyed woman clenched her fists as she spoke. She had absolute confidence that she could easily take down the other party in hand-to-hand combat and then hand over the two priceless captives to her employer. After this, she could give up her current life as a looter and disguise herself as a successful and wealthy businesswoman and settle down in a big city. If she was lucky, she could find a young, handsome, and capable man to be her partner, and she would be able to enjoy the rest of her life. But if she was unlucky, she could use this wealth to buy a few young and handsome slaves and use them to satisfy the flames of desire in her heart that would never be extinguished. In short, for this business, she had almost buried the elite team she had built up and even exposed herself to danger. So no matter what, she could not afford to fail. Looking at her former companion, who was approaching step by step, Lefany did not show the slightest bit of nervousness. Instead, she couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ha ha, interesting. This is really interesting. So the betrayal was fated from the start. But regretfully, the final victor is not you. What do you mean? Just as the one-eyed woman was about to knock her out, she suddenly stopped her fist in midair. Just like the literal meaning. Do you think I really took care of him? Along with Lefany's slightly mocking tone, the large hand made of energy that had disappeared appeared once again, tightly grasping the woman wearing the eye patch in its palm. Before she could react to what had happened, Luke opened his eyes and climbed up from the ground. He sneered and said, "Just like the literal meaning, it was I who took care of you, not you who took care of me. Now, tell me, who is the employer? Damn it, you weren't poisoned?" The one-eyed woman was shocked and angry. Her gaze stopped on Lefany's face several times, as if asking why she was poisoned and he wasn't. Of course I wasn't poisoned. All of this is the same as the play you put on in the desert. It's all a kind of art of deception. The only difference is that you didn't succeed in deceiving me, but I succeeded in deceiving you. After saying this, Luke casually took off his outer clothes that were stained with soup and walked up to the captive. Without any hesitation, he directly took off the black eye patch on the captive's eyes. In the end, he discovered that what was hidden under the eye patch was not a blind eye, but a magical item that was as dazzling as a gem. To be precise, it was a high-end magical eyeball that could be used as a substitute. The technology used on it was the same as the sacrificial array below the shrine. What is that? Lefany stared at the strange radiance emitted by the magical eyeball and asked in astonishment. A precious magical item. If I'm not wrong, the value of this toy is definitely not low. What? You didn't know about it before? Luke asked back without turning his head. Lefany hurriedly shook her head. I've never seen it before. As far as I know, she never took off her blindfold. Ah, things are really getting more and more interesting. Madam, can I trouble you to first explain where this toy came from? Don't try to lie or be stubborn, or else you'll understand that being young doesn't mean being soft-hearted. Just as he finished speaking, under Luke's control, the huge hand of energy suddenly started to exert force. In the blink of an eye, the one-eyed woman's bones let out a series of cracking sounds, followed by painful howls that reverberated in the room. No, stop, I'll talk. I'm willing to tell you everything I know, but you have to promise that you'll let me go after you tell me everything. Bargaining? I'm sorry, but you've already lost your bargaining chip. Perhaps I should use a little more force and directly crush your hip bone. Do you understand? If the bone here shatters, then you'll most likely have to spend the rest of your life lying on a bed. Chapter 1279. No, you have to promise to let me go first. Otherwise, I won't say a word even if I die. The one-eyed woman clearly knew why she was still alive and why she was being cruelly tortured. The answer was simple. She had the information that the other party wanted to know. This was also the last bargaining chip she could use to exchange for a right to live. However, this bargaining chip had a prerequisite, and that was to be able to withstand all the tortures that would follow. Once she couldn't withstand it, she would naturally tell everything she knew and hope that the other party would be merciful enough to give her a quick death. Without a doubt, the one-eyed woman's tenacity was beyond Luke's expectations. After trying to use magic to torture her for a few minutes, he finally realized that she wasn't joking and that she wasn't stubbornly resisting. She really did have the corresponding awareness. Helplessly, he could only open his mouth and promise, "All right, I agree to your conditions. As long as you tell me everything I want to know, I'll let you go." Thank you. I swear, you won't be disappointed by the information I provide." Under the intense torture, the one-eyed woman's body trembled nonstop. Sweat soaked her clothes and dripped down her cheeks. At this moment, her legs, arms, and toes were all injured to varying degrees. There were broken bones, and there was also pain from the fire and lightning burning her skin. "Please begin, I'm listening." Luke raised his arm and gestured for her to begin. His expression was cold and merciless, especially when he saw the injuries that he caused. Not only did he not have a shred of guilt or pity, he instead revealed a chilling excitement. That's right, it was excitement. The one-eyed woman could even clearly feel that when she couldn't help but wail and scream, the boy in front of her actually revealed an expression of enjoyment. Just as she opened her mouth and was about to say something, a blinding light suddenly flashed outside the window. "Not good. Run." Luke, who had always been extremely sensitive to energy, had a huge change in expression. He didn't have time to cast any magic and directly jumped down from another window on the second floor. The next second, boom! A dazzling white arrow of light directly pierced through the hotel room he was staying in, tearing the entire second floor of the hotel into pieces. From afar, it looked as if a sharp knife had sliced through the ceiling of the first floor and leveled the entire second floor. All the walls, furniture, and roof on the second floor disappeared without a trace after the beam of light ended. Shocking. Fear. Tremble. Everyone who saw this scene couldn't help but open their mouths wide, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Luke, the only one who managed to escape, was standing on the first floor, looking up at the wasteland above him. After much difficulty, he finally managed to squeeze out a few words. Superheat ray, as the name suggested, high-temperature super energy ray, was a line made entirely of magic energy. Furthermore, this line had characteristics that were extremely similar to that of a laser. For example, it had a terrifyingly high temperature that could instantly vaporize most solid matter. Furthermore, it was extremely fast. Once it was released, the chances of dodging it were very, very low. If it wasn't for the fact that he could see out of the window from where he was standing, he might have disappeared with the other two women in the room. Clearly, the person who could release such a spell definitely had the ability to threaten his life. After realizing this, Luke cast all his defensive spells on himself as quickly as possible. Then, he carefully looked through the gaps between the buildings to find traces of the enemy. But before he could find anything, the white light once again shone in the distance. With a boom, all the buildings within a radius of dozens of meters were wiped out. Unbridled. The unknown enemy used actual actions to prove that he didn't care about the ruler of this city and the innocent people who were struggling to survive. However, when the white light shone for the third time, Luke finally saw the enemy's appearance. It was a guy who was covered in silver-white metal armor from top to bottom. He held a shining staff in his hand, and the top of the staff was embedded with a huge energy crystal. All the high-temperature super energy rays were shot out from this crystal. Summon a meteor. Without the slightest hesitation, Luke immediately unleashed the most powerful attack he knew so far. In the blink of an eye, a meteor burning with red flames fell from the sky and smashed directly into the target's head. Boom! Crash! Tremor! The sky was filled with dust and thick fog. When the dust settled, the guy in white armor was still standing in the same place. He didn't seem to be hurt by the god. The meteor was split in half. The cut in the middle was as smooth as a mirror, and it could even reflect a person's reflection. Without asking, he knew that the white light blade shot out from the staff had cut the meteor in half. "Who are you?" Luke's pupils kept shrinking and enlarging, showing that his master's heart was not calm. "I am the shadow of death. Put down your weapons and surrender." The guy in silver armor used an extremely ancient and unfamiliar language to give an ultimatum. "The shadow of death? You're the marauder known as the shadow of death?" Luke frowned subconsciously. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the other party's movements were very stiff and disjointed, giving him a very awkward feeling. "I'm a shadow of death. Put down your weapons and surrender." "I am a shadow of death. Put down your weapons and surrender." This strange guy seemed to have no intelligence. No matter how he asked, he would only repeat this sentence. This doesn't seem to be a living person. Luke was clearly not as ignorant as the other marauders. He quickly realized the true identity of the famous shadow of death, and an expression of shock and disbelief appeared on his face. According to the descriptions of the tribal elders, before the invaders came, there were no such thing as artificial life in this world. Therefore, this humanoid puppet-like creature was most likely a creation left behind by the Dalant people, or was receiving orders from the Dalant people. Those invaders from another world hadn't really left. They were only hiding temporarily. They had gone from brazenly oppressing and plundering to hiding behind the scenes, secretly manipulating everything with the help of marionettes. Spellcasting Heavens. Please bookmark. Spellcasting Heavens is hot right now. Chapter 1280. Bionic Alchemy Puppets. According to ancient records, they were the vanguard of the Dalant invasion of this world, and they were also the main culprits who disrupted the order of the old world. These bionic puppets were different from the steel and stone puppets, with terrifying destructive power that were used to fight large armies and defend magic fortresses. When they were first designed, a series of cutting-edge magic technology was used to make them look similar to the invading natives of the world. So for a long time, the world was unaware that many foreign invaders had quietly infiltrated all aspects of the world, and some of them even occupied important positions. When the Dalant's people secretly built the teleportation gate, tens of thousands of invincible troops poured in. They quickly created chaos, suspicion, and hatred from the inside. As a result, many seemingly powerful countries were completely disintegrated overnight and became prisoners. It could be said that when the Dalant's people had just started to expand and weren't very powerful, these bionic alchemy puppets played a crucial role. But later, as the army continued to grow and the magic technology continued to innovate, they gradually surpassed most of the primitive civilizations trapped on the mother planet. They no longer needed to rely on such schemes and tricks, and preferred to use pure strength to crush the resistance. Using the simplest, most direct, and most cruel method to destroy the last bit of faith in the enemy's heart, to make them kneel down willingly, grovel at their feet, and give up everything. They might even feel proud of becoming a slave or a servant army. So, the bionic alchemy puppets were naturally gradually eliminated and eventually became a kind of sealed technology. In particular, the bionic puppets that had carried out important missions were not directly destroyed or abandoned, but were temporarily put aside in case of emergency. Now, with the sudden closure of the spatial ring that connected countless worlds 12 years ago, the Dalant's people who were left alone and helpless on this planet finally remembered that they still had a trump card to use. After all, it had been too long since the last war, and the inheritance and continuation of the original civilization had been interrupted. Now, not many people remembered the horror of the bionic alchemy puppets. Through the puppets' sparkling gem-like eyes, the Dalant's people hidden in the shelter clearly saw the boy standing not far away, and also noticed the unbelievable magical talent in him. Just as he was about to give the puppet a new order to test the boy's true limits, another voice suddenly sounded from behind. "This is the target you've been looking for." "Ah, that's right. Do you remember when I told you about the scene I saw with my own eyes 12 years ago? At that time, he was just a newborn baby, but he easily used energy resonance to kill everyone in the fortress except me. As for the reason, it was just that we showed a little malice to him." When he said these words, the former's disproportionately large eyes burst with fear. He would never forget the bloody scene of more than a dozen heads of his kind exploding in an instant, and would never forget the tremor that came from the depths of his soul when the baby looked at him. Run! It was this subconscious reaction that allowed him to survive and find shelter. In fact, all these years, he had been secretly looking for the baby that haunted him like a nightmare, eager to find out what secrets the baby was hiding. "Do you want revenge?" A person with the latter's feminine features slowly walked out of the darkness, a little curiosity in her voice. It must be known that the Dalen's people were a race that attached great importance to privacy and self-will. If someone was determined to do something, even if they knew that it would fail, the others would not try to stop them. Of course, the premise was that it did not harm the interests of the group. "Revenge?" The male Dalant shook his head gently. "No, I don't hate him, and I don't want to use his blood to prove anything. I just find it inconceivable that a strange baby would appear in the space-time loop, and he looks so strange. He's an intelligent life that we have never seen before. Well, it's your freedom to do what you want. I have no right to interfere. But please don't forget that before the portal to the mother planet is repaired, we must hide as much as possible and not arouse the vigilance of certain forces. You should know that without support, if we confront those guys head-on, we will suffer heavy losses." The female Dalant reminded him meaningfully. "You mean those gods who were almost killed by us, and then relied on the so-called holy ones to drag out an ignoble existence?" The man pursed his lips and did not hide the contempt and disdain in his heart. However, the Dalen's people did have the qualifications to do so, because the number of gods who died in their hands was at least 800, if not 1,000. They even developed special weapons that specifically targeted the gods. With just one shot, the high and mighty gods would fall into the mortal world and become lambs at the mercy of others. Unfortunately, because this planet was a place that was conquered relatively early, there was no such thing at that time. After the god-slaying weapons were invented, the gods who had been defeated countless times gave up their original arrogant attitude and began to resist in an extremely disgusting but effective way. To put it simply, it was to hide their bodies and then achieve the purpose of remote control through the technique of sacrificing the souls of believers. Although this was far from being able to exert the full power of the gods, not even 1/10 of it, it could inflict heavy losses on the small forces of the Dalen's people. Especially when the gods began to not care about their reputation and used all means, including sneak attacks, assassinations, and destruction. No matter how powerful the civilization was, it would be a headache. Therefore, the Dalen's people began to build magic fortresses near some strategic locations and connected the fortresses to the mother planet through portals. Through these fortresses, which were both offensive and defensive, they could continuously weaken and reduce the range of activities of the gods and believers, and eventually eliminate them forever. However, all of this fell short of success because of the storm 12 years ago. Don't underestimate those gods. After 12 years of development, some of them have become much stronger. They have even established countries and fanatical armies in areas where our control is weak. The woman obviously disagreed with the man's view, and her tone suddenly became serious. The higher they climb, the harder they fall. I'd like to see how long they can resist after the space-time loop is repaired. Chapter 1281. There was no doubt that the bionic alchemy puppet's destructive power was absolutely astonishing. This was especially true in the densely populated streets of the city. Every attack would cause all the buildings within a radius of tens of meters to be turned into ruins. The residents would either be directly hit by the terrifying beam of light and die without leaving a single trace behind, or they would be burned alive by the scorching heat. It was unknown whether they were lucky or unlucky, but because the whole process was too fast, most of the victims didn't even feel any pain. Standing next to a collapsed house, Luke's expression was solemn as he stared at the alchemy life form covered in armor not far away. He was highly focused. Although the two sides had only met for less than 5 minutes, they had already exchanged blows several times. He was very clear about how terrifying the other's destructive power was, and he was also very clear that ordinary attacks simply couldn't damage the internal structure of the high magic resistance armor. It was clear that this was the first true enemy he had met in this world. As for the previous raiders, they were at best ants that he could casually crush. They had never threatened his life. Just as Luke was about to try to wait for the other to launch the next attack and make use of the time difference to counterattack, the eyes of the bionic alchemy puppet that called itself Death Shade suddenly flashed, followed by a deep and hoarse voice coming from its mouth under the helmet. "Good morning, child from an unknown race. I really didn't expect you to have grown so big in just 12 years. You have intelligence?" Luke was undoubtedly startled, and his face revealed an unconcealable surprise. After all, creating a puppet that only knew how to obey orders and creating a living being with independent consciousness and judgment were two completely different concepts. The latter involved a series of complex and profound knowledge, including the creation of the soul, and was definitely not something that could be done with magic alone. Me? Intelligence? No. If you're referring to this puppet, it doesn't have any intelligence. The one talking to you now is me, a master who is remotely controlling it from afar. The bionic puppet explained with a smile. It could be seen that the controller was very emotional at the moment, revealing a kind of inexplicable excitement and fanaticism. "So you're saying that these raiders were hired by you?" Luke subconsciously frowned. For some reason, he suddenly felt that this matter wasn't as simple as he had imagined, and it wasn't purely a matter of interests. "Hired? Ha. Do you think they're qualified to be hired by me?" "No, they're just a bunch of insignificant chess pieces thrown out to test your reaction." However, from the looks of it, these guys seem to have exceeded their expectations. "Do you know? 12 years ago, we met once, but I was so scared that I didn't take advantage of the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For the past 12 years, I've been searching for you. Today, I've finally found you." While saying those words, the bionic puppet raised its hands under its master's control and unscrupulously released the scorching heat from the energy crystal. Destruction. Slaughter. Destruction. In less than half a minute, several streets and alleys were razed to the ground. The rest of the ordinary people who saw this scene screamed and quickly fled further away. A few brainwashed idiots shouted that the Great Will couldn't be defeated before rushing towards the puppet's location in an attempt to capture that dangerous person. However, before it could even get close, it was vaporized into a gaseous state. Facts once again proved that in the face of formidable power, resolute will, undying faith, and great dreams were all bullshit. Luke took a deep breath as he stared at the ordinary people scurrying around like headless flies. He probed with an uncertain tone. "You said we met 12 years ago? Then you should be one of the Dalen's people in the magic fort, right?" "Ah, that's right. It seems that the person who took you didn't hide the truth." The bionic puppet gently nodded. "Can you tell me what happened back then? For example, where did I come from? What's my race?" Luke's tone was full of expectation. As an intelligent life form who couldn't fit in with his surroundings and couldn't find anyone similar to him, he always had a strong sense of loneliness. Although the elders of the tribe had always tried to create an atmosphere for him to integrate into the tribe, the difference between them was too great. Unfortunately, the difference in species was too obvious. Even a blind person could see that he was not a member of the tribe. "You want to know your own history? All right, I'll give you a chance. Here, this is a map. Follow the map and mark the oasis. There's an abandoned magic fort there. It's currently occupied by some people who call themselves believers of the gods. Kill them all, and then look for clues about your history. They're all intact and preserved somewhere in the fort." After saying that, The alchemy puppet raised its right hand and gently shot a weak ray of light into Luke's pupils. The next second, boom, Luke's brain seemed to explode. A huge map kept flashing on his retina. The weak red dot was obviously the bone city he was in, and the white that was relatively far away was the destination. There was no doubt that this was an extremely advanced magic technique, far surpassing the primitive magic knowledge taught by the elders of the tribe. From this point alone, one could judge the astonishing gap between the Dalen's invaders and the original magic of this world. When the map and the dots disappeared, Luke suddenly realized that the bionic puppet had quietly left at some point, leaving behind a huge mess. In the distance, an army of hundreds of priests and monks was rapidly rushing towards the site of the incident. It wasn't hard to tell from the angry expressions on their faces that they wouldn't easily let go of the culprit who caused this disaster. According to Luke's judgment, if he stayed to negotiate, he would most likely be used as a scapegoat for the culprit. Thus, he decided to go all out and escape. When the monks and priests arrived, they found nothing except ruins and a large number of charred corpses. What was even more frightening was that the beliefs of the ordinary residents who had witnessed the battle had completely collapsed. They were no longer willing to believe in the so-called Great Will, and this was rapidly spreading to every corner of the city. Chapter 1282. The oasis was the only piece of land in the endless desert that was covered in vegetation. It was also the most suitable place for habitation. This was because an oasis meant an abundance of water, which meant that crops, vegetables, and fruits that could only grow under sunlight could be planted and harvested. It could be said that whoever owned an oasis would be able to live a blissful life that would be the envy of more than 99% of the world's population. Unfortunately, as a planet that had been conquered by invaders, most of the oases had been occupied by the Dalent, and sturdy magic fortresses had been built there. Any native who wanted to obtain even a little water to survive would have to pay a heavy price, and sometimes even die. However, with the disappearance of all the Dalen's people 12 years ago, the magic fortresses built on the oases were eventually seized by a few more daring fellows. Although they were temporarily unable to enter the core area that was protected by a large number of magic and puppet guards, they were able to rely on the sturdy walls of the fortress itself, as well as a large number of tall spires to repel their competitors who were also trying to occupy the oases. Of course, these fellows had not received much education and might not even understand the essence and basic principles of magic. They were completely unaware that the spires used as arrow towers were actually a fully automatic defense system. Generally speaking, as long as one of the Dalen's people was in charge of controlling them, they would be able to saturate and attack enemies within a radius of a few kilometers. Numbers were no different from a joke in front of such advanced magical energy weapons. Luke, who had finally arrived at his destination after a long and arduous journey, heaved a sigh of relief as he sensed the astonishing amount of energy gathered within the magic fortress. He muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "This is where I first appeared? I hope the secrets hidden within won't be too disappointing." As soon as he finished speaking, he ignored the warning sign written in blood stuck in the bushes and strode toward the fortress. However, before he could reach the main entrance of the fortress, he heard a thud, followed by an arrow that was stuck in a spot less than 2 fingers away from his front foot. "Stop! Otherwise, the next arrow will pierce your throat." An archer, standing on a high ground, shouted at the top of his lungs. "Pierce my throat? Are you sure you can do it?" Luke's eyes flashed with a bone-piercing chill as he raised his head and asked with a sneer. He didn't know if it was because he had seen too many dirty, dark, and ugly things after coming into contact with the outside world, or because he couldn't wait to find out who he was and where he came from. In short, whoever dared to block his path would be mercilessly killed. Not to mention, the Dalent who had provided him with clues had requested to kill all the living people in the fortress. The archer didn't realize that he was so close to death. He opened his mouth and laughed. "Ha! A little bastard from an unknown race. I thought it was some dangerous enemy. Powell, go and catch this kid. Maybe Sir Priest can reform him and let him bathe in the glory of God." "Damn it! Why is it me again? A fat man pushed open the door and walked out of the fortress while cursing. When he reached out his thick arm to grab the boy's collar and lift him up, a blinding light shot out from Luke's fingertip. In less than a second, a huge hole was burned in the abdomen of the man called Powell. The intense pain made him scream like a pig being slaughtered. Ah! My stomach! My stomach! Damn it! Shoot! Shoot! This little bastard knows magic. The archer standing on a high ground shouted a warning as he quickly drew his bow and shot. In a very short period of time, several deadly arrows were shot out. Unfortunately, before the arrows could even get close to the target, they were blocked by an invisible force. Admiring the shocked look on the man's face, Luke raised his head and said in an emotionless tone, "Sorry, you've made a stupid mistake. It's time to pay for it." In an instant, a blazing meteor fell from the sky and smashed into the spire with a boom. The raging flames devoured all the living beings inside. Some of them couldn't even bear the intense pain caused by the flames and directly jumped down from a height of tens of meters to their deaths. Such a brazen attack naturally attracted the attention of the other people in the fortress. In less than 3 to 5 minutes, 200 to 300 fully armed men rushed out. The man in black leather armor in the lead questioned with a gloomy face, "Who are you? Why did you attack us?" "I attacked you? No, you're mistaken about one thing. Your men attacked me first. Of course, there's no point in dwelling on this now. Come, let me kill all of you first. Then, I'll slowly find the answer I want." As he spoke, Luke had no intention of explaining or clearing up the misunderstanding, because some things once started meant blood, slaughter, and death. Unless one side completely collapsed, it would never stop. "Arrogant! You don't know what you're facing." The man in black leather armor suddenly raised his right hand and loudly chanted an ancient language that outsiders could not understand. In the blink of an eye, everyone began to be surrounded by a faint red halo. After doing all this, he waved his hand and ordered, "Go! Capture him! I'll sacrifice him to the great God tonight. Charge! For the great God, for purifying this world. Long live Narosa!" Accompanied by the fanatical atmosphere, hundreds of guys with a round tattoo on their right arm that looked like a sun started to charge forward. Especially the red halo, which significantly increased their movement speed, agility, and strength attributes. Divine art. Luke recognized the essence of the red halo's power at a glance. A flash of light flashed in his eyes. Then, without thinking, he once again released a lethal high-temperature ray. Ever since he saw the release of the puppets, he had been trying to simulate and create similar spells. Finally, 3 days before he arrived at the oasis, he made a breakthrough. Although in terms of pure destructive power, the ray was definitely far inferior to the summoned meteor magic. The former's cutting effect often caused unimaginable damage to flesh and blood. In addition, the consumption was much lower. It was suitable for the current situation. Chapter 1283. The outcome of a battle was never determined by numbers, but by the efficiency of killing. In this aspect, Luke, who possessed powerful magic, undoubtedly had an absolute advantage. From the beginning to the end, in less than 5 minutes, he had killed over 100 warriors who were taller, stronger, and more proficient in killing with cold weapons than he was. But what was interesting was that he didn't find any fear, uneasiness, or cowardice in the eyes of these people before they died. Every pair of eyes was so calm, as if they had returned to their mother's embrace instead of being cut in half by a scorching heat ray. Without a doubt, this wasn't something that could be explained by bravery at all. It was faith, unwavering faith that even death couldn't change in the slightest. Realizing this, Luke slowly raised his head and stared into the eyes of the man in black leather armor. He asked with great interest, "Can you tell me about the God you serve? I'm very curious. What kind of promise did he make to you that so many people are willing to give up their lives for him?" "Oh, you actually know about the existence of God?" The man's mouth widened into a joyful smile. It was as if in his eyes, his dead companions had only returned to the embrace of God, so there was no need for him to be sad or depressed, because that day would come sooner or later for him. After all, It had been too long since the era of theocracy. Most of the ordinary people in this world had already forgotten about the gods they once worshipped. In addition, with the conscious oppression of the Dalant people, the gods who were lucky enough to survive could only spread their faith in a very small area, ensuring that they wouldn't go extinct due to the loss of faith. I come from a tribe with a complete inheritance. The path of nature is the existence of God. But I didn't expect that a God who was supposed to be high and mighty would actually give up his dignity and live like a wandering beggar. Is such a God really worthy of you sacrificing everything to worship and believe in? Luke's tone revealed an undisguised, strong sarcasm. In his innate impression, the reason why gods could attract mortals to offer up their faith in spiritual world was that they were powerful, omnipotent, and far superior to mortals. If they lost all of this, could a god still be called a god? The answer was obviously no. Some greedy mortals who yearned for power and eternal life would even view such a god as a target to be hunted down. But what was interesting was that the gods of this world had maintained this state for quite a long time, but their believers still remained devout, never thinking of abandoning or betraying them. Shut up. What do you know? In order to protect this world and resist those greedy and evil invaders, the great God has paid a price beyond your imagination. Hearing someone insult his God, the man in black leather armor became agitated. If eyes could kill, Luke would have been chopped into pieces by his knife-like gaze. Protect this world? Are you referring to this world whose resources are about to be depleted and is about to enter the end of the world? I'm sorry, but if this is the world they're protecting, I can only say that they're a bunch of losers from head to toe. They don't deserve faith at all, or should have perished along with the old era. Rather than calling the thing you serve a god, it would be better to call it the undead of the old era. The order that they hope to restore will never be realized. With a teasing tone, Luke approached the main gate of the fortress step by step. Just as he was about to cross the threshold, the man in black leather armor suddenly released a terrifying pressure. His gray pupils released a golden light. Mortal, was it you who was spouting nonsense and looking down on the existence of the gods? A voice full of dignity questioned. You're the god they serve? A coward who hides his true face? Luke stopped and looked straight into the other's eyes without showing any weakness. Coward? Is this your opinion of me? No. Young man, I'm just more cautious. Moreover, those invaders who call themselves Dalen's people have never really left. Tell me, what are you looking for in this place? The unknown god didn't seem to be angered by the strong, insulting words. He stroked his chin and revealed a curious expression. After all, no matter how strong the verbal insults were, it couldn't compare to being caught like a mouse by the Dalen's people, constantly reducing his living space and eradicating his church and faith from the root. I'm looking for my past and future. Luke didn't try to hide anything and openly stated his intentions. Past and future. The unknown god was stunned for a moment, but soon couldn't help but reveal a playful smile. I almost forgot that you're also an outsider. You're emitting an aura that doesn't fit in. Luke keenly sensed the other's unspoken words and frowned. He probed, So I wasn't born here? No, of course not. Any life born on this planet will be given a mark, a soul mark that only the gods can see. I'm curious, who told you to come here to look for your past and future? As he spoke, the god raised his right hand, as if wanting to touch the boy's forehead. But before he could touch him, Luke released a wall of air and spread it out. He scolded with a disgusted expression. Scram, get your dirty hands away from me. Don't try to pry into my thoughts. It was a Dalen's person who told me. A Dalen's person? Where is he? The unknown god's tone suddenly became stern. However, Luke shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly. Who knows? He spoke to me through a bionic alchemy puppet. If you want to find their hiding place, you have to first look for a raider called Deathshade. As far as I know, the Dalen's people have already used that bionic alchemy puppet to do many things. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you, he also asked me to kill all the people in this stronghold who claim to be believers of the gods. The god sneered and curled his lips. Using you to test my strength? What a boring trick. If you don't mind, can you tell me what you plan to do? Why do next depends on your attitude. If you let your believers leave the stronghold, then I won't do anything. But if you continue to block my path, I will destroy you and your believers at all costs. Compared to creation and construction, killing and destroying is always much easier, isn't it? Luke straightforwardly gave two choices. He had always maintained a high level of vigilance against the Dalen's people, so he wouldn't do as they asked. Chapter 12:84. You're very confident that you can kill me and my believers all by yourself? The unknown god didn't seem to be enraged by the provocation and still maintained a good demeanor. To be precise, he might have long-forgotten emotions, such as anger, that would easily cause him to lose his rationality and judgment under the harsh living environment of the Dalet. After all, this was the only way he could ensure that he wouldn't make the wrong decision in anger and cause the loss of his few believers. After a few probing, Luke had undoubtedly noticed this and replied expressionlessly, "I'll only know if I can do it after I try." Gods are indeed powerful life forms that surpass mortals, but this doesn't mean that they are invincible. At the very least, the magic of the Dalet can hurt or even kill you. Most importantly, how much power can you unleash in your current state? Ha ha, what a clever little fellow. If you weren't an outsider, I would even be willing to grant you part of my divine power and divinity so that you have the qualifications to become one of us. But regrettably, the law at the birth of this world is that no outsider can become a god, let alone obtain the power of faith. Very well, I'll fulfill your request and withdraw from the fortress so that you can search for your own past and future. No one knew what the unknown god was thinking about, but he took the initiative to wave his hand and motion for the believers who were ready to fight to the death to move aside. Thank you. Even though Luke didn't know why the god was doing this, he still bowed politely and strode into the magnificent magical fortress that was full of decorations and emotions from another world. Watching his back gradually disappear into the corridor, a person who seemed to be a higher level couldn't help but ask, "You're letting him in just like that? What? Do you still want to stop him? Or did you not feel the surging magical energy in his body just now? This child is right. He has enough power to kill all of us, although he will have to pay a considerable price." The unknown god smiled and spoke the cruel truth. As for whether it was embarrassing or not, he didn't care anymore. Survival. It was something that could change everything. Suppression, compromise, adaptation, and finally survival from the cruel elimination. As a god who had survived from the era when the gods had fallen, he had long since tossed the so-called pride and dignity of a god into the trash heap. Otherwise, those idiots who had been killed, imprisoned, and dissected for research by the Dalet were the best negative examples. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to embarrass you. The guy who spoke quickly lowered his head, like a child who had done something wrong. Relax, I'm not blaming you. You're the same as those sacrificed believers. You have faith that is as bright as gold. But the problem is that the long period of oppression has caused you to lose the conditions to receive education. You lack sufficient knowledge and sharp judgment. Remember, this child is very special. I can even clearly sense the power of destiny surrounding him. So, he might become the promoter of that great plan. Maybe he's an enabler. Maybe he's an obstacle. Who knows? But one thing is for sure, he doesn't have a good impression of the Dalen's people. He's an ally that can be won over. Just as the unknown god was conversing with the believer, Luke had already arrived at the leftmost area of the second floor. But the glass jars that had been placed there had disappeared. Instead, there were beds for resting. Needless to say, the guy who had occupied the fortress had converted this place into a resting room. Fortunately, the pool of dried and blackened blood on the ground was still intact. This is the blood of the Dalen's people mixed with brain matter. Luke bent down and used the magical energy released from his fingers to analyze the cells that had already lost their vitality. The blood of the Dalen's people was completely different from the blood of this world's life forms. Not only was the color darker, but the upper limit of the amount of magic it could carry was also much, much higher. If the magic power of most spellcasters in this world was compared to a bowl of water, then the Dalen's people were a well, or even a huge reservoir. Through continuous in-depth research and continuous modification of their bodies, The Dalen's people had long surpassed their original selves and evolved into a higher life form. But what Luke found hard to understand was what kind of power could blow up the heads of a dozen Dalen's people in an instant. In order to find out the truth, he carefully took out a pale, yellow scroll that was somewhat black. Then, without thinking, he activated the spell stored in it. The next second, asterisk boom. Asterisk everything in the room was torn apart by an invisible force and then quickly reassembled. It was as if time was flowing backward, and it began to show what had happened in the past. Because it happened too quickly, it didn't take long for them to return to that day, 12 years ago. Look, what did I find? A mysterious life form that was teleported over from the space-time loop. A male Darention shouted excitedly as he held up a dripping baby in the air. Teleported over from the space-time loop? How is that possible? Didn't the space-time loop malfunction because of the energy storm? Normally, it's impossible for something to be successfully teleported over during this period of time. Another female Dalen's person stared at the small baby and questioned. But soon, she sensed the magical energy released from this small life form's body. Clean, pure, not the slightest bit of contamination. This was a precious treasure that all spellcasters could only dream of. We need to do a comprehensive research on him. Another Dalen's person stood up and suggested. From his eyes, one could clearly see the excitement, agitation, and strong anticipation. Then what are we waiting for? Let's begin. First, we need to cut open the baby's skull and look at his most important brain. Before the person could pick up the tool, a shocking shockwave was emitted from the baby's body. Immediately after, the magical energy in the room seemed to be stimulated and began to frantically resonate. The loud noise could be heard clearly even from a few hundred meters away. Everyone knew that resonance was an extremely terrifying phenomenon. It could even be described as a disaster. The result was as expected. The heads of every Dalen's person suddenly exploded under this resonance. Only one lucky person standing at the door escaped this calamity. Chapter 1285. Under the influence of death and fear, the only survivor quickly fled the scene, leaving behind the baby who was babbling on the spot. After some time, Brolin finally appeared. He carefully picked up the baby, turned around, and jumped out of the window on the second floor. So that's how it is. This is me. No, it should be the past me. I came from the ring of space and was transported to this planet by some kind of power. Looking at the illusion that had stopped in front of him, Luke's eyes sparkled with joy. He couldn't help but try to touch his non-existent self. After about a minute or two, when the magic stored in the scroll was exhausted and everything was restored to its original state, an extremely blurry shadow suddenly appeared in a mirror made of an unknown metal. Following that, the shadow asked in a rather familiar voice, "How was it? Did you see the pure and powerful power you possessed when you were born? Now tell me, who are you? Where did you come from? It's you? You've been spying on me?" Luke frowned subconsciously. He could tell that the person talking to him through the mirror was none other than the mysterious guy who had controlled the bionic alchemy puppet last time. He was also the sole survivor in the illusion. Spying? No. Not spying, but observing. I feel a huge potential in you that far surpasses everything. Perhaps one day, you and your race will appear, and you might do what we did to this planet. The Dalen's tone revealed a strong sense of crisis. Of course, he had enough reason to think so. After all, the Dalen, who originated from Mocha, had walked step by step like this, using the pain, despair, blood, and death of thousands of races to forge their current glory. As the saying went, judge others by your own standards. If a higher civilization or species suddenly descended, according to their rationality and logic, they would definitely do the same thing as him. So in your eyes, I'm a spy sent here by the entire race? Luke suddenly had the urge to laugh. He really couldn't imagine what kind of race would send a newborn baby without any self-awareness to a completely unfamiliar world. However, the Dalant clearly didn't think so. Instead, he nodded seriously. That's right. From a certain perspective, infants were indeed the most suitable vanguard to invade a world. because they look so fragile and harmless, just like the bionic puppets we sent to this world at the beginning. They can perfectly blend into an unfamiliar environment, and even win the trust of others. Most importantly, I saw coldness, ruthlessness, and cruelty from the depths of your soul. Oh, just because I kill those raiders? Luke asked with a cold smile. Of course not. From the perspective of a civilization, pests like the raiders, who had no output and relied solely on slaughter, destruction to survive, deserved it no matter how many of them died. Your true coldness is reflected in the way you treat your companions and the tribe that raised you for 12 years. Do you remember the girl who sneaked away? You didn't hesitate to give up looking for her after you obtained the clues that you desperately wanted. That's because your blood is cold, without the slightest bit of warmth. That coldness that comes from the depths of your soul is something that even I can feel from so far away. When he said this, the Dalen's tone was full of praise, as if this coldness was a supreme virtue, a higher, evolutionary direction. One had to know that absolute self had always been a kind of ideology and philosophy that the Dalen's people advocated and pursued. In their concept, only by eliminating all distracting thoughts and concerns and wholeheartedly throwing oneself into the sea of magic and knowledge could one truly comprehend the true essence of power and reach a certain pure and supreme realm. The indifference that Luke had shown and his merciless abandonment of the worthless past happened to be a perfect match for the current situation. It was as if the 10 years of tireless teaching by the elders of the tribe had been in vain. The values, concepts, familial love, friendship, and gratitude that they wanted to instill in the boy were ultimately ineffective. In just 2 short months of coming into contact with the outside world, Luke had become a completely different person from before. If he returned to the tribe's encampment now, those who were familiar with him would definitely be trembling in fear. What are you trying to say? Luke was obviously starting to get tired of this way of talking, and an impatient expression appeared on his face. This was because he hated the other party's eyes, and even more so that fanatical and sick tone, as if he was a freak. You're angry. Don't be angry. I have no ill intentions towards you. On the contrary, I think that you should find your own future. Now that you know where you came from, can you tell me what you plan to do next? The Dalen's huge head was full of interest. Could it be that you have some good suggestions? Luke narrowed his eyes and probed. I do have a suggestion. Do you know? Ever since we lost contact with our mother planet, all of my people and I have been hiding in a place called the Sanctuary. If you don't mind, how about we play a game? I've scattered the information about the location of the Sanctuary and hidden it in every corner of this world. Every time you successfully decipher one, you'll get a coordinate. Once you get all the coordinates, the door of the Sanctuary will open to you. Of course, to make it more interesting, I'll also place some obstacles and magic knowledge along the way. Sanctuary sounds like a secret hiding place that's isolated from the rest of the world. Believe me, if there isn't a Dalen to provide accurate coordinates, outsiders won't be able to find the Sanctuary even if they dig up the entire planet. How about it? Do you want to accept my suggestion? Why not? I like games. At the same time, I like to gain something in the process of playing games. Smart choice. Then now, I'll give you the first clue. It's hidden in the core area of this magic fortress. What you need to do is to destroy the 2 steel puppets that are guarding it, and then decipher a magic lock that I've personally set up. Remember, when you decipher the magic lock, you only have one chance. Once you fail, the important information stored inside will be instantly engulfed in flames. That sounds interesting. I'm already eager to give it a try. Then, let the game begin. Let the game begin. Chapter 1286. In the deepest part of the fallout shelter, a female Dalen was standing in an inconspicuous corner, observing the fanatical and obsessed figure at the end of the tunnel. After a few minutes, she lowered her voice and asked the person beside her, "How long has Wells been in this state?" "It's almost been a month. I think his mental state is extremely unstable. Ever since he found traces of that boy, he has been hiding in there without eating or drinking, relying entirely on absorbing energy to sustain his survival. If this continues, his organs will start to fail, and his soul will be distorted and strengthened under the nourishment of energy. I believe you should know what it means for a Dalant spellcaster to enter this state. Another female with a scary scar on her neck answered in a low voice. From her eyes filled with anxiety, worry, and vigilance, it was not hard to tell that the man called Wells had obviously become a threat to this fallout shelter. Damn it, it's already to this extent? I knew it was a mistake to bring him into the fallout shelter. This guy is too obsessed with that boy of unknown origin. The female who spoke before could not help but curse in a low voice. It was important to note that the souls of Dalant people who had been deeply modified many times were different from most normal magical creatures. They had a very special and rare attribute, which was energy absorption. Especially when the physical body was weakened to a certain extent, the soul would desperately absorb the surrounding energy to ensure that it could continue to exist in another form after the physical body died. Of course, if that was all, it would not cause such panic. What really made them nervous was the huge change that occurred when the soul absorption reached a certain critical point, as well as the terrifying impact on the surrounding environment. The more powerful the spellcaster, the more energy the soul would absorb, and the more serious the impact would be. The most terrifying one could even tear apart all life and matter within a few kilometers, turning them into the purest energy vortex. If such a thing happened in the fallout shelter, then all the surviving Dalant people on this planet would be instantly killed. Without a doubt, this was a crisis that could not be allowed to happen. Do you think we should take some forceful measures now? The female with the scar on her neck suggested. Forceful measures? Are you sure this will not cause an even more serious disaster? You just mentioned that his mental state is not very stable. I think it's too risky to take forceful measures. The former shook her head and refused. Taking coercive measures against a Darantion spellcaster who wielded great power? Anyone who was not an idiot wouldn't do that. Regardless of whether it would succeed in the end, just the aftermath of the battle was enough to destroy part of the fallout shelter's important facilities. Not to mention that once there was a huge commotion, the fallout shelter would be exposed to the enemy's sight. Then what should we do? Are we going to let him step by step to the edge of death? The female with the scar on her neck subconsciously tightened her grip of the strange-looking weapon in her hand. Needless to say, she was ready to take action. Unfortunately, her position in the fallout shelter did not allow her to make a decision. Before she could take any action, she was stopped by another woman next to her. I've said it before. It's too, do you want to get us all killed? Look at his soul absorption and distortion energy of his energy. The only thing we can do now is to start with that mysterious boy. The female with the scar on her neck was obviously not an idiot. She instantly realized the mystery, and her eyes lit up. You mean, I authorize you to unseal the strongest bionic alchemy puppet, Marissa, who has an independent consciousness and personality. She once helped us to destroy the world's most powerful country, so she will definitely be able to complete this mission. Remember, bring that boy back alive. Understood. Luke obviously did not know that he had been targeted by the Dalant spellcasters in hiding. He was fully focused on cracking the complicated magic lock in front of him. He had to admit that compared to the natives who were still stuck at the primitive elementary use of energy, the Dalant spellcasters had mastered dozens of times more advanced techniques. Of course, this did not refer to the destructive power of spells, but to the in-depth research on various levels. But for some reason, he understood most of the complicated and intricate magic lock just by looking at the mysterious symbols flowing on the surface. His brain seemed to be out of control, and all kinds of thoughts and ideas kept popping up. In the end, after a series of extremely irregular touches, the magic lock automatically opened with a snap, revealing the treasury hidden behind the door. As for the giant metal battle puppets on both sides, they had long been smashed into a pile of scrap metal by the shockingly destructive magic. Although they had not completely lost their ability to move, it was almost impossible for them to stand up with just their terrifying weight. Let me see what kind of treasures are hidden in the core of this magic fortress. As he spoke, Luke gently pushed open the metal door covered in dust and cobwebs. The next second, the dazzling light almost blinded his eyes. Gold, silver, all sorts of rare magical metals, and so many gemstones that could fill an entire pond were cast into blocks of varying sizes. These gemstones were not purely decorative, but could be used to store spells, or were precious materials used to create expensive magical items. Apart from that, there were also some interesting bottles and jars on the shelves against the wall. As the labels were written in the unique language of the Dalent, he was unable to determine what was inside. But judging from the energy waves emitted by the strange things in the bottles, they were most likely the most valuable parts of magical creatures, especially a finger bone, which constantly emitted an astonishing amount of divine power. Its owner must have been a powerful god. Through the shocking wealth in the treasury, Luke realized for the first time how terrifying the plundering of the Dalent spellcasters was. In order to satisfy their endless thirst for resources, they did not care about sustainable development at all. They only wanted to use the fastest and most effective method to completely squeeze a planet dry. And they did not care about the lives of the natives living on this planet. Unless there was a certain race among the natives that had a powerful magical talent. In this way, the Dalent would completely enslave them after destroying their civilization, beliefs, and resistance, and finally absorb them into the huge war machine as cannon fodder. Chapter 1287. There is no doubt that the astonishing wealth stored in the treasury was definitely not a small fortune for the Dalent people who had a strong and prosperous civilization as their foundation, especially the gemstones and the magical materials soaked in bottles and jars. Any spellcaster would not be able to resist the greedy thought of taking all of them for themselves. But unfortunately, Luke turned a blind eye to all of this and began to concentrate on searching for information about the refuge. He knew that in this apocalyptic world where order had collapsed, gold and silver had long lost their value as a basic currency. Even if they were left on the roadside, scavengers might not be willing to pick them up. They could neither be eaten nor drunk, nor could they be made into tools or weapons. Their only function was to be used for decoration and decoration. Who would want this kind of trash? In fact, in the 12 years since the Dalent people disappeared, the entire world did not become better. Instead, it showed a worse and darker side. First of all, the collapse of the ruling system caused the original order to disappear. The natives who had been enslaved for countless years unscrupulously vented the anger in their hearts, crazily destroying everything related to the Dalent people. As everyone knew, individuals under the control of the will of the group would often lose their ability to think and judge. All of their actions were full of ignorance and blind obedience. As a result, in the process of destroying the traces of the Dalent people's existence, many of the magical devices used to maintain agricultural production, irrigation, as well as refining and producing resources were destroyed along with them. By the time they reacted, there was already a pile of ruins behind them. Not to mention restoring the world to its previous state, they could not even support the current population. In order to survive, they had no choice but to start fighting with each other, killing each other for the few resources that were left. Secondly, there was the collapse of the financial and monetary system. When the Dalent people ruled this planet, they would wantonly mine and purchase precious metals and gemstones. Any natives could use these things to exchange for food, water, cloth, spices, and other necessities. To a certain extent, this plundering of resources stabilized the purchasing power of precious metals and gemstones as currency. But when they disappeared en masse, the value of precious metals and gemstones fell to the bottom. Perhaps some spellcasters would still need some gemstones, but precious metals were absolutely uncared for because they had lost the universal recognition that was necessary as currency. Found it. After circling the treasury a few times, Luke finally found a black stone slab on one of the shelves. It was densely packed with constantly changing symbols. However, because it was written in the Dalent's own language, he couldn't decipher it for the time being. Fortunately, even if he did not recognize these strange characters, it did not mean that others did not recognize them. In particular, the enemies who had been fighting against the Dalent would definitely be able to decipher these words. With that in mind, Luke took the slate and walked out of the fortress without any hesitation. He spoke to the unknown god who had been waiting at the entrance for a long time. "I want to make a deal with you." "Oh, what kind of deal?" The unknown god asked with great interest. "I've just opened the core treasure vault of the magic fortress and found something interesting. If you don't mind, can you translate it for me?" Luke said as he handed over the slate in his hand. When the unknown god saw this stone slab, his eyes instantly emitted a faint golden light. He pursed his lips and praised meaningfully. "Unbelievable. You've actually found this." "What is it?" Luke asked impatiently. "It's a ledger. It records the whereabouts of all the plundered resources from this world," the god explained casually. "Whereabouts? You mean?" Luke obviously realized something. His eyes shone with a strange light. "That's right." The god nodded gently. "Just as you guessed, every once in a while, those greedy invaders would transfer the plundered resources to another place, and then transport them back to their home planet from this place. So, where is this place?" Luke obviously did not care about the whereabouts of those resources. He only wanted to find the location of the refuge. "Sorry, I don't know. I only know that they hid this place very well. They did not allow anyone who was not from the Dowland to enter at all. If you really want to find it, you'd better go to a place first." The god took the initiative to give a suggestion. "What place?" "Roth. It was once the capital of the most powerful empire in this world. It was also the first city conquered by the invaders. There should be the answer you're looking for in the ruins of that city." "Roth?" "Yes. It used to be called the Miracle City, blessed by the gods. Not only did it have the most magnificent and gorgeous temples and palaces, but also had the most devout and fanatical believers." Just as Luke got the clue and set off toward the ruins of the ancient city, another boy on planet Mocha was already standing in front of the repaired portal. He asked without looking back, "Teacher, I'm about to set off. Do you have anything else to say?" "There's nothing to say. I believe that conquering a technologically backward and chaotic world is not a problem for you at all. The only thing I need to remind you is that if you find a clue about your other brother, don't rush to take action and don't try to bring him back by force," Orin said in a serious tone. "Why?" The boy obviously did not understand his teacher's intention. Orin smiled and explained, "You have to understand that he is not like you. He grew up among the primitive natives who hate us. He doesn't understand how great the magic civilization created by the Dowlant is. I don't want to bring back a genius who is full of enmity or even hatred toward us. Do you understand? So you want to change his thoughts and views first?" The boy was very smart. He immediately understood what his teacher wanted to express. "It's good that you can understand this. As a teacher who has watched you grow up to now, I know very well the great potential in your body. If nothing unexpected happens, your brother should also have a similar talent. If he really threatens us one day..." Before Orin could finish, the boy interrupted, "Don't worry. If that day comes, I will kill him with my own hands and make him into an alchemy puppet. Nothing can stop us from moving forward, even if he is my brother." Chapter 1288. Conquest and plunder, like a pair of twins, were deeply engraved in the genes of the Dowlant people. Every Dowlant was filled with ambition towards the outside world from the moment they were born, influenced by their elders and school teachers. In their culture, anyone who could bring resources and wealth to the mother planet was a true hero. Not only could they obtain great benefits and prestige, but they could also take the opportunity to enter the upper echelons of society and become a member of the ruling class. Of course, as a typical advanced magic civilization, the ones who truly held the decisive power were always those powerful spellcasters. On one hand, they had unparalleled strength that ordinary people could not match. On the other hand, only they could control those complicated magic devices and destroy the enemy. Most importantly, after countless self-modifications, spellcasters had extremely long lifespans. Time had endowed them with wisdom that surpassed ordinary people by countless times. Some of them had even become special life forms that surpassed gods. At present, these old monsters were gathered in a dark, ancient house that emitted a moldy smell. There were no expensive magic lamps placed on the table. Instead, there were lit candles made of unknown animal fat. With the continuous innovation of technology, Even the poorest Dalent people could now ensure that the magic lamps in their homes would not be extinguished. However, they still used some ancient lighting devices that were only mentioned in history books. After a full minute, one of the old men, who was withered and thin like a mummy, coughed hard and took the initiative to speak. "That child is set off. Tell us, what should we do next?" "The plan that has been brewing for 12 years is finally about to begin." Another old man, whose entire body was shrouded in dark shadows, spoke with a strong sense of expectation. The old man who spoke first nodded seriously. "Yes, his appearance means too much to us, especially the bright light released by his soul. It's like the most beautiful treasure in the universe. If there's really a huge race behind him, we'll have to start considering whether to kneel down and become their vassals or take all the knowledge and technology and flee. But what if that's not the case? What if there are only 2 of such precious lives left?" Another old man asked with a faint smile. "Then let them completely integrate. With the help of their blood and genes, we can increase the potential of the Dalent people to the greatest extent. If I'm not wrong, some of you should already be preparing to breed mixed blood descendants, right?" As he spoke, the man shrouded in darkness raised his head, his eyes emitting an emotionless light. Obviously, the people of Dalent, who had relied on continuous self-modification to develop themselves, did not care about the T theory of pure blood. At least in the eyes of the upper echelons who had the right to make decisions, the purer the bloodline, the more intelligent and the greater the potential. This was pure nonsense. To be exact, it was impossible to find a so-called pure blood among the Dalent people living on planet Mocha. Everyone had at least 20 other genes mixed in their bodies. As early as in the barbaric era, the ancient Dalent people had already realized the benefits of racial integration. They constantly allowed themselves to mate with magical creatures to give birth to mixed blood descendants. Then, they allowed these mixed blood descendants to mate with others of the same race. Through the method of bloodline dilution, the entire race's talent in magic was gradually increased. Today, the more prosperous and influential a family was, the less the proportion of people with primitive bloodlines would be. However, the Dalent people did not accept any trash. At the very least, they would not allow those with low intelligence, lazy, and useless to improve their potential to integrate. On the contrary, when dealing with such trash, they would often adopt the method of genocide once and for all. Hee, isn't this a matter of course? But I'm a bit doubtful whether that boy will really accept the future we've arranged for him. From his growth experience, it can be seen that the appearance of our race's females does not meet his standards of beauty. The old man who looked like a dried corpse reminded with a worried expression. From the information flashing on the black slate, it was not difficult to determine that this little fellow who suddenly appeared in the spatial ring, and who was very likely the culprit behind the energy storm, was rarely affected by the surrounding environment. It was as if he was born with a strong sense of self. Isn't that simple? Pick out a portion of the talented females and have them undergo a permanent change in appearance. In addition, have the adjutant of the expeditionary army pay attention and see if there are any females of the races in the conquered worlds that will attract his interest. The black figure gave a solution without hesitation. For an exceptionally developed magical civilization, a permanent change in appearance was not a big deal at all. Moreover, all the Dalent people who had become spellcasters did not care about their appearance. Looking at the people in power who controlled the direction of the entire civilization, some of them were already in the state of undead, while others had transformed themselves into shadowy forms. The furry and cute fellow in the corner would devour the soul of an innocent person every once in a while, turning the other person's body into his own temporary vessel. Unfortunately, the boy clearly did not know that he had been targeted by the higher-ups. He was currently commanding the expeditionary army to cross the portal and appear on an empty beach. Before he could observe his surroundings, several Dalent people hiding behind rocks rushed out and shouted with ecstasy, "They're here! They're finally here! The reinforcements from the mother planet! Hooray! We're finally saved! This time, we must let those damned natives know what it means to resist us. War, destruction, death. I want to return the suffering we've suffered all these years in double. Accompanied by crying and cursing, these people who seem to be in an extremely sorry state lay on the beach without a care for their image. Their faces were full of expressions of having survived a disaster. One must know that in the worlds conquered by the Dalent people, the strength of the natives could be said to be uneven. Some of them were so weak that they only needed to send a very small force to maintain their brutal rule, while some of them were so strong that they needed to use conciliatory policies to rope in the local forces. It was best to let them kill each other. Even if the original order was destroyed, they would not dare to use high-pressure policies on the valiant natives. Needless to say, this world belonged to the latter. Therefore, after losing contact with the mother planet, the Dalent people who stayed in the magic fortress immediately suffered endless revenge and pursuit. It was already considered a strong will to be able to hold on for 12 years without collapsing. Chapter 1289. Gather them immediately. Gather the necessary information. I want to know what happened in this world within 10 minutes and how many enemies we have to face. Gazing at the crazy Dalent's people on the beach, the boy quickly issued an order to his subordinates. As the supreme commander of the expeditionary army, he was very clear about his duty and what he needed to prove to the higher-ups who had been paying attention to him. Without a doubt, this was a test, a comprehensive test of his wisdom and endurance. Understood. A female Durant didn't say anything and immediately ordered the healers in the team to step forward and help the people who had fallen on the beach up. She then cast spells on them one by one to force them to quickly calm down, then asked them about the changes that had happened in the world in the past 12 years. At the same time, the large-scale expeditionary army began to set up camp. In just a short while, they built a war fortress with powerful magical powers. That's right, relying on powerful magical powers. The Dalent's people only needed less than half an hour to build a war fortress. What was even more frightening was that this kind of war fortress wasn't just a primitive defensive structure used to withstand the attacks of the cold weapons era, but a powerful magic fortress with over 10,000 defensive spells. Even if it was subjected to large-scale group attacks, it wouldn't be damaged at all. Normally, with such a sturdy fortress, even the Dalent's people would have to put in a lot of effort to break it, not to mention the primitive natives of the backward world. It was also because of this that they could easily defeat the rebels time and time again, pushing them to the ground and rubbing against them without restraint. When the last arrow tower was completed, the tip of the tower released a gorgeous violet radiance that enveloped the entire fortress. It was obvious that this was a magical barrier that could be used to strengthen and protect oneself while weakening the enemy's continuous spells. It was the accumulation of knowledge, technology, and experience. It was an ultimate spell that required countless time, energy, and even generations of geniuses to continuously research it. As long as the core wasn't destroyed, all allies within the barrier would be able to continuously enjoy great benefits. As the barrier was fully activated, the expeditionary army automatically divided into small groups and methodically entered their own defensive zones. Only barbarians with low intelligence would foolishly charge into a head-on clash with the enemy without scouting for information or understanding the changes in the surrounding environment. The people of the Dalent, who had long regarded invading other worlds as normal, would not make such a stupid mistake. Instead of taking the initiative to attack, they prefer to stay in the fortress and wait for the enemy to take the initiative to attack. After all, defending was always much easier than attacking. At the same time, the losses were also much lower. They could also determine the threat level of the enemy through the attack and formulate the next plan. About an hour or two later, the female subordinate stepped into the core tower and placed a black slate on the table. "Commander, the information you asked for is here." "Oh, so fast." The boy put down the experiment he was doing, and a trace of surprise appeared on his young face. "Our database has already recorded most of the situation in this world. Combined with the information provided by the survivors, it's not difficult to understand the current situation," the female Dalent replied proudly. "Very good. Then give me a general overview of the situation. the boy said as he picked up the slate and quickly flipped through it. First of all, the planet under our feet is a world filled with rich magical energy, not at all inferior to the mother planet, Mocha. But regrettably, the natives here do not realize that studying magic requires a complete and huge system. At the same time, they also need to spend a lot of effort to cultivate countless apprentices, thus forming a virtuous cycle. On the contrary, they pursue a typical elite education. Every powerhouse will only teach no more than 10 apprentices in their lifetime, and most of these apprentices will not live to graduate. Therefore, the birth of every powerhouse is full of accidents and accidents. Their path cannot be replicated. The only thing the successors can do is to slowly explore the path of knowledge and power alone. Perhaps 1 in 10,000 people can climb to the top of the mountain alive, and that is already very lucky. To a certain extent, the most powerful group of people in this world is enough to pose a great threat to the Expeditionary Army. Therefore, the previous commander of the Expeditionary Army did not use excessive violence. Instead, he reached certain agreements with certain people in private, such as providing them with some magical knowledge that they are interested in, methods to extend their lifespans, and so on, in exchange for these powerhouses not to pose a threat to our conquest plan. Of course, as for those diehards, we use the most bloody and violent method, killing them along with their families and friends. Normally, as long as we continue to maintain the connection with the mother planet and maintain a strong deterrent force, no one should easily jump out and rebel against our rule. But unfortunately, following the energy storm 12 years ago, the spatial gate was forced to close. At the very beginning, the people who stayed behind were barely able to maintain order, but soon this weakness was exposed to the natives. The result was obvious. Including those who had once cooperated with us, the entire world rose up in rebellion and even massacred our race. After 12 years of pursuit, a total of 100,000 of the most elite spellcasters, warriors, and alchemists had all been killed or injured. The rest of them were scattered into small groups, hiding in the wilderness and the forest, just like what they had seen before. This group of damned barbarians even forced the noble Dalent people into the Colosseum, making them fight with their own people and even savage beasts with their bare hands. While saying this, the female subordinate's eyes flashed with extreme anger. She could tolerate her own kind being killed, but she would never allow them to be humiliated. This was because not only would one's dignity and glory be tarnished, it would also be a disgrace to the entire race and civilization. They used a mere 12 years to wipe out an expeditionary army? Looks like this world is very interesting. The boy muttered to himself while stroking his chin. He obviously did not care about being humiliated at all. After all, even if he was given an honorary title, he was very clear that he was not a Dalent and would not tie himself to the Dalent people and the entire civilization. Chapter 1290. What do you plan to do next? The female Dalent was clearly dissatisfied with the commander's nonchalant attitude, so she probed with an expressionless face. She didn't understand why the higher-ups would let this boy who came out of nowhere become the commander of an expeditionary force, even if he found a way to fix the energy turbulence and make the spatial ring work again. Next, the boy rubbed his chin and glanced meaningfully at his restless subordinate. He smiled and replied, "Of course, we'll capture a few alive and figure out the internal situation of the enemy. Don't forget, those who were hunted to the point of insanity have long lost contact with the civilized world. We don't even know how many enemies there are, and we need to pay special attention to those people. War is not a game, especially when the ultimate goal is to conquer the entire world." Just when the female Dalent was about to say something, a series of footsteps came from outside. Following that, a male Darrenton warrior in silver armor knelt down on one knee and bowed solemnly before reporting loudly, "Lord Commander, I'm here to deliver the news. Our patrol team had just captured a primitive wooden sailboat near the shoreline. There were about 30 people on it. Among them, 25 resisted and were killed on the spot. There were 5 prisoners. Should we interrogate them immediately? Did you figure out their identity?" The boy's eyes were filled with curiosity. According to the confession of one of the men, They are a group of pirates and mercenaries. They heard that there are traces of gallant people nearby. They want to capture slaves and sell them to a port city called Archie City. The warrior gave a straightforward answer. Although the gallant people were a civilization dominated by magic, the number of warriors was not small at all. However, they were different from the impression most people had of warriors who wielded weapons and charged into enemy lines. They were more like mecha pilots. This was especially true for the silver full-body armor on his body. Not only did it have strong defensive capabilities, but it also had an independent energy supply system. Any wearer could easily exert the destructive power of a giant. Coupled with energy weapons, even a civilization with advanced thermal weapons would be defeated in an instant. Pirates and mercenaries? Bring them over. I have some questions that I need them to answer. The boy hesitated for a moment before making his choice. Although he had read the detailed information recorded on the stone slab, he still found it inconceivable that this world could kill 100,000 fully armed expeditionary forces. After all, an expeditionary force of 100,000 gallant soldiers was enough to destroy an entire planet. This was not an exaggeration. It was the literal meaning. Every complete expeditionary force would be equipped with an ultimate method, which was to directly detonate the planet's core, causing the boiling surface to tear apart the ground and cause devastating damage to the surrounding environment. No life form could survive in such a harsh environment, not even those powerful beings known as gods and devils. But what was interesting was that the expeditionary army left behind in this world clearly had the means to perish together with the enemy. But why didn't they take action? In the expeditionary army, the will of the supreme commander was equivalent to the will of the entire civilization. No matter how much dissatisfaction and resentment there was in their hearts, they had to hold it in and wait until the end of the expedition to return to the mother planet before bringing it up. It could be said that the best commander was the dictator of the expeditionary army. His every order could not be disobeyed. In less than 5 minutes, 5 captives in tattered clothes were brought to the hall of the tower. 4 of them were men, and the last one was a woman. Every one of them emitted a sour smell that only came from not bathing for a long time. Their clothes were also stained with dark red blood. Uneasiness, fear. From the eyes of these captives, one could clearly see how afraid they were of this magic fortress that suddenly appeared. After observing for a full minute, the boy smiled and said, "Hello, brave gentlemen and ladies. Do you know? I really don't know if I should admire your courage or laugh at your ignorance. You actually dare to target the gallant soldiers. Sir Commander, I suggest that you don't waste your breath on these inferior races. Immediately let the spellcasters extract their souls and read their memories. This world must pay for their barbaric actions. The price of blood, death, and destruction. No one can survive after slaughtering a gallant expeditionary army." The female subordinate gritted her teeth and suggested. In her heart, she had probably sentenced all intelligent life in this world to death. Don't kill us. We're just a bunch of pirates and mercenaries who don't know anything." The decision to attack you back then was the result of the 13 kings joining hands. They are your enemies, the culprits who caused all this. All we want is to earn some money. Obviously, it was unrealistic to expect a group of people who would do anything for wealth to face death unflinchingly. The man in the lead didn't even hesitate to spill out all the information he knew. In fact, such a large-scale operation couldn't be hidden for long. When the boy heard this, he immediately turned around and asked his subordinate, "Do you know who the 13 kings are?" 13 kings? The female gallant soldier was stunned for a moment. Then she clenched her fists and cursed. "Damn it! How dare these maggots!" The so-called 13 kings are actually the first batch of powerhouses who chose to cooperate with the expeditionary army after we came to this world. Some of them did it for power, some for knowledge, and some for wealth and power. In the end, under the conferment of the commander, they divided up the land and citizens of the destroyed countries and assisted us in gathering important resources, at the same time developing and strengthening their own forces. So, this is a show of betrayal? The last expeditionary army was wiped out by the puppets they personally raised? The boy pursed his lips, his face full of sarcasm. It must be known that the Dalent soldiers weren't a kind race that preached equality and universal love. If one wanted to successfully deceive them, one had to be even more vicious, brutal, and ruthless than them. If possible, he really wanted to see the commander of the last expeditionary army with his own eyes and ask him what he was thinking at the time to let the puppets under him go out of control. No, that's not right. How could these 13 people wipe out the entire expeditionary army in one fell swoop? There must be some unspeakable secret. The female Dalent soldier seemed to have realized something. She picked up one of the captives and questioned sternly, "Details. Tell me more details."